Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Housing and Communities Select Committee. I'm Councillor Claire Simmons, Chair of the committee, and I will be chairing tonight's meeting. This meeting is not being streamed live due to current IT issues. However, it is being recorded and will hopefully be added to YouTube following the meeting. Now I would like to welcome all those in Committee Room 1 at Kensington Town Hall. Before we proceed with the meeting, I would ask members of the committee to please make sure that your mobiles are on silent or switched off. And we will start with 72 seconds of silence to remember those who lost their lives in the Grenfell tragedy. Thank you. Thank you. So we will start the meeting then with the item on the agenda. Apologies for absence. I believe no apologies have been received. And declarations of interest. Does any member have an interest to declare? So then we move to item 3, which is the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 16th of September. The action tracker and the minutes of the previous meeting have been circulated. Does the committee agree to sign them as a correct record?
Agreed.
Agreed. Are we now? After this. Yeah, I just signed them. So moving on then. Tonight we're going to be looking at the community sections of item 4, the scrutiny of budget proposals, and item 5, statutory versus non-statutory services first. And then we will be looking at the housing and social investment sections of those two agenda items. So starting with communities then, we will be looking at the scrutiny of budget proposals for communities. Welcome to Councillor Sarah Anninger and welcome to Naira Ability. Would you like to present these pieces to us?
I was planning to do that because I think they're pretty clear.
They are pretty clear, so there's nothing you'd like to draw our attention to in particular.
No, I think it is pretty straightforward. Sets out what our budget is and how we delivered against our previous savings proposals.
Excellent, thank you. So this report is being presented to the committee as part of the budget scrutiny work being undertaken by the budget working group for the 26-27 budget. And I will now invite questions from select committee members. Councillor Dory.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to ask about the community partnerships. grants and the change to how city living local life will work. On the community partnerships, I was sort of reviewing my question earlier, and perhaps it's less of a question really, and just a brief statement. I think it is an ever shrinking pot really. I think that we need to consider how best that's being proportionate. Otherwise, it's just ending up as a small number of a large number of organisations fighting over a very ever shrinking pot. And I'm not sure that's the most effective way to apportion these funds, I think, or it's not even ideal for the organisation themselves. So if we are doing this exercise, I suppose I would just urge to do a bit of a proper rethink with the organisations about how this money can be spent, as otherwise I'm not sure the current approach is really going to work with shrinking pots. I suppose.
So that's why we've been at consultation. So we've had 2 meetings with the voluntary sector, which I have been at, but officers have, and then we've been at consultation, which I think goes today, in fact. So obviously we don't know the outcome of that, but no, we can't continue the way we have. And I think the voluntary sector also need to think about their role. Do they need to join up with other organisations, or what is their offer versus what is really needed? So I think it's a really good chance actually for everybody to rethink, because we're not going to have the amount of money we have.
On city living local life, I'm not sure I fully understood what the proposal is. Basically, you would explain what is the idea of how COL is intended to work from next year.
But you won't see any change next year.
Okay.
That's clear. Because there isn't an amount and it's being used up every year. And at some point that may run out.
Okay, so
there won't be any change for the next couple of years.
Okay, it's just that there is no set of fresh funds being introduced.
No, and if you remember a few years ago, we stopped the rollover.
Yeah.
And this was all part of how we were just going to keep going. Because if we didn't stop the rollover, we would have run out of money a lot earlier.
Okay, so potentially, we don't know what the situation will be like at some point in the future. It may completely come to an end. There is still fresh funding, but that's okay. I think that's for nature.
Actually,
Going back to the list of people who get organisations that are going to be affected. When you go through the procedure, you'll presumably have the list and you have who they serve and you have the report there. I mean, were there any that you felt weren't performing to the standards, or is there a method of review as to whether they're effective and use the money effectively?
Yeah, and I think it's not just, so the whole consultation has been not just with the voluntary sector that we support, it's everybody, the whole voluntary sector in the borough is asked to comment. So we're going to have to look at this across everything, because it's not just the amount of money that communities gives, it's also what property is doing, what other grants are coming from other directorates. So there's going to be a very big review. It's not going to be just.
So there might be some people who will no longer. Okay.
Well, can I just ask a question, because I'm currently trustee of 3 charities. So I do Westway, the Youth Club, and the Fallen Park Older Residents. And I think, with the exception of one, they don't really understand what's happening. Or, I think. So my question is, what are we doing to prepare some of these services of what might happen? We just don't have the same amount of money, because people think, oh well, we've had problems before and it would be all right, sort of thing. So
I think that's really disappointing to hear, because the reason we started this process early was to make sure that doesn't happen. So I'm going to look at Moira now, because you've had 2 meetings.
Let's say response fell into that section as well. They
So
don't
response-
really, it's come up with the response community project, really don't quite understand.
Okay, well, can we take that away?
Yeah.
Because I think
They can speak with those organisations specifically, but we have the Voluntary Sector Support Fund in particular, which is the main fund. This round ends in March 2027. So we've started the conversation now to give enough time for those organisations to understand and to prepare for what's going to happen in 2027, from April 2027. Now, we don't know which organisations will be successful or won't be successful. In fact, at this point, because we've just finished the consultation, we don't know what the Voluntary Support Fund is going to look like for the next round in 2027. But we have started discussing with the sector that there is going to be less money. These other proposals is going to be a reduction of 50% by 2030, and they need to start thinking about other forms and other sources of funding and not being so reliant on the council, because we just do not have the same amount of funding that we previously did. And if we, and it's good that we're having this conversation now, because if we're hearing that there are organisations that just don't get that or haven't heard or believe that, it will be all right, we need to have that conversation to prepare them.
I think some people think as long as they are doing a good job and delivering and whatever, what they don't understand is yes, but there just isn't the money here. And I think, more needs to be done, because I don't want to be the prophet of doom to say actually don't rely on it. But on the other hand, it worries me.
But we can reach out and do more around that engagement before the next round opens up for application next year.
I did see Joanna's words.
Thank you. It's funny, just on that point, I happened to do something in a charity down in Hampstead called Fulham, and I was just talking to the chief executive about half an hour ago, and she was saying to me, it's the financial sum, they have no idea of what they're talking about. And I think that's partly because we as a council don't really know where that sword is going to fall. But the problem is, I've said to her, well, as a council, KNC, we're not being pushed to 50%. And she said, oh, right, okay. So she said, I've been looking at 30%. But actually, she's working on that assumption. Whereas it sounds for a lot of people, they feel that A, that sort of Damocles won't fall as radically, and it certainly won't fall over there. So actually, this does need to be a much more nuanced language to say, actually, the pot is substantially smaller. And I think we as a council also have to ask ourselves, how much of the pot do we really want to actually cut down? Because actually, if we are having to either do less services ourselves, then actually we rely on the voluntary sector picking up those elements. So actually, do we really want such a large cut, or do we actually want to say, maybe we should change frontline services to be able to give that funding? And I don't know if that's in your consideration, but from where I sit, I kind of look at it and go, the voluntary sector has stepped up before, and I recognise there is less money, but I do wonder whether there should be more money. And I leave that one with you to think about, because I recognise that, we don't know the funding settlement yet, and we don't know the fair funding review outcome. My actual question was on page 34, which is the Communities Department covering circa 300,000 rent for 5 VCS organisations. And I wanted to understand what you were sort of proposing, and also whether you were looking at any tampering effects with that, or actually whether they were just suddenly going to get cold turkey by 2027. Because that's probably a substantial sum. And is it actually ceasing to fund them, or actually putting them in cheaper accommodation might be an option? I sort of, again, I looked at that and thought, what other options might there be?
So this is linked with, so you're right, we don't want people to go cold turkey, because for some organisations it's a small amount, for other organisations it's a very large amount. And it's linked to the BCS leases work that colleagues in housing and social investment are undertaking at the moment. And we actually did our consultation at the same time as a joint consultation. And part of that work, and so some of you may remember the social investment strategy from last year, part of that was around looking at those organisations in our property, and with the rent that we are charging, possibly discounting that significantly, so they're not paying the full rent. But it's a way of us being able to very publicly signpost what exactly the rent is. So having a fair system whereby all VCS in our properties do pay the rent but may be discounted. So that is part of the conversation because they do provide that social value while they're in their occupancy of those properties.
And so.
And I think we were subsidising something that should have been really children's. So it's really just making sure it's sitting under the right directorate and they're subsidising rent, not communities, because it's not somebody we fund.
So you are, or somebody will be picking up circa 300,000 UK rent, or are you saying that slightly short?
I would say no one's picking up that 308,000 rent, because that's going as a saving. What is going to happen is that some of the rent will be discounted. But that is a conversation that needs to happen with colleagues on social investment around what level of discount there might be on the rent, if that is the case for those organisations within our property.
And if it isn't discounted, then there is a conversation to be had with the organisation.
Yes, we will be having those conversations with those organisations anyway about the proposal.
I follow on from that. We're looking at 5 BCS organisations amounting to 300,000. It's like 60,000 per year.
It's not an equal distribution at all.
So that means some of those 5 might be actually more than 60,000 per year, subsidised by the council.
Yes.
This is why we're doing a review, because there's so many different agreements
Yes,
historically, and that's why.
So why have we got in brackets 308? But if you've just specified 308 in one column, you should be able to specify 308 in the other, because that's quite exact, isn't it? So we are talking about 308.
Yes, it's 308.
Okay, fine. Lloyd.
Thank you. Yes, like my colleagues, I work with a number of people that would be affected in this, and I would echo that some people are not quite aware. I'd also say that some of the residents that I've been to, there's been some mixed messages coming from our MPs about possible hope on the horizon. Now, you mentioned on page 21 that there's lobbying, effective lobbying going on. I wonder if there's anything optimistic you can say from that, or hopeful you can say to that.
Are you talking about the fairer funding?
Yes.
We still don't know. I mean, we've heard from somebody that it won't be as bad as we think, but it could. They then indicated it could be $1 million. So I think in the scheme of things,
That when that comes from a member of the parliament, that's worrying when residents' association are getting that and they're thinking, oh well, it's not going to be as bad as it is. So it just echoes what some of my colleagues have said. Thank you.
Could you explain that, Sarah, what you said about $1 million?
they indicated to me that we might get, instead of 82.3, whatever it is, we might get 81. We might lose 80.81 million.
Oh, you mean the
So
difference?
the difference would be $1 million.
From what I hear, I think it's somewhat better than that. But as we say, we do not know, and it's an unknown.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions from the team? No. In that case,
I think Hamish put his hand up.
Hamish, sorry.
Briefly, thank you, Chair. If I just return on this point on the fairer funding, I think surely it would be wise, even if we are suddenly granted more funds, to still work with these organisations.
Oh,
To
absolutely.
try and make them a little more robust. I mean, this isn't something new. This has been going on for a few years now. And I think it would be sensible if we can try and make them a little bit more robust, because these things happen. They're relying effectively on the council, some of them, for their existence. And I think that's not a great position,
Well, this is why we're
given these
doing
vagaries.
the whole review, because if you reinvest 22.4 million in voluntary sector, and have we been getting good value for money? The majority of that money is in the north. So again, I think doing a review is really helpful. It's just looking at all the different grants across the council and putting it together and then doing it properly.
Just one final point on citizen local life. I think I've raised this possibility of please the council there, I'm raising a few as well. I think if we want to spend this money a bit faster, I think it would be as a council to do that. I think altering or loosening some of the parameters of citizen local life, I think would
Make it easier.
significant.
Make
As
it- I
well.
think
I'm not sure we're going to get into all of these
No.
tonight, but I would still raise.
we did that light touch review the problem is that, if people are organising events, you have to do the safeguarding, health safety checks, all that sort of thing. And as the Grenfell Council, I don't think we can say, sorry, we're not going to
I
ask
don't think
people
that's,
to do that.
that's mine, but I think that's all absolutely fine, but there's other things, the type of things that it can be used for, so.
Could I just comment on that? Because I essentially had to help both residents associations to write their city living applications. And when they get things like risk review or insurance or something, they just go into blind panic. And so I kind of find myself looking at it going, is there either some sort of self-help tool you could have as to how you fit in the formal process? Because we just make it so complicated. I mean, I think I said to you the other day, we've got a Christmas tree up in Nottingham Bay. I daren't organise carols around it because of the hoops I have to jump through. And you're kind of going, actually, the whole idea of a Christmas tree was to get the community together. And City Living Local Life can't do it because on one hand we give them money, and on the other hand we set such high hurdles that we just can't achieve it.
Well, I'm afraid that once it goes into an event, it goes to the events team and it's out of our hands. And that's the difficulty. I mean, I know from organising big street parties, it's a completely different challenge with the events team and all the different hoops you have to go through.
Well, it's just 3 people
I
standing there,
know, I'm
3
really
seats.
sorry. I mean,
we
Christmas
do
tree
have-
is a Christmas tree.
I,
We
but
do
it's
have
my
we do have in Moyle's team excellent staff in City Living Local.
Yeah.
And I believe they are quite helpful in assisting people in making applications.
They are, and I always say, if people come to me
Yes.
and say they can't do something, please speak to
Yes.
Hattie or
Yes.
Jackie or whoever.
They're very good.
They're very helpful.
Linda, did I see your hand up there? Linda?
I do agree with Joanna that sometimes the actual presentation is difficult. I can understand if it applied to a business, but not to residents groups. So I understand the questions have got to be asked, but it's actually the presentation that which makes it people, quite. And Andrea, for example, was almost, I mean, a highly intelligent woman who worked in banking, was so frustrated by the form. So, I mean,
So we
Well, we
have
can
some,
take that
we
away.
have some feedback here generally, not budget related,
Not budget
around simplifying the procedure for CLLL. I now would like to ask my questions on this part, of if I may. First of all, was there, I mean, it's very timely that we're having this review. Because I think it's actually somewhat overdue, because I think over the last several years, I think there have been questions asked, which have been difficult to answer. So it's excellent that we're bringing everything together into a standardised way now that questions can be answered. I'm wondering, with the Voluntary Sector Support Fund, was there any consultation with either residents or service users of the organisations likely to be affected?
That's the consultation that we've just carried out.
So that's the one that's closed today, is the survey. Excellent, thank you. And does the review include any consideration of the types of provision currently being supported and the need, and whether there's duplication and so forth?
It's the whole reason for doing it all. It's not just the money. I mean, we were, in an ideal world, we wouldn't be cutting the fund by so much, but it has given us this opportunity to look right across the council
Yes.
at all the different funding pots that go into
Yeah.
the voluntary sector.
I think it's very much a silver lining to reasons why this is prompted. I think it's excellent that it's happening. I would like to ask, where is 40 to 50% coming from? How was that arrived at? Because we're saying there just isn't money, but there is an overall council-wide focus on budgeting, budget gaps and costs and so forth. Where has this 40 to 50% sort of come from? How did we get to that?
So you're
Because members of the committee have asked whether it's the right amount that we should be looking.
So I think previously we had fallen on the voluntary sector for a year or a year and a half, and we heard loud and clear they wanted 3-year funding. So I think we did that. Obviously, times have changed, and we were then looking at what we could realistically do going forward. I think if we had gone, I mean, there was talk of doing 25%, which is too low. But I think 50% is a realistic number. 75 would not have met what we need to do. I think we would have funded too many people again.
So why do we say 25 is too low? What's our rationale?
Because I think we'll look at 50 and then we can reduce it if people can get funding from elsewhere, which they should be able to do, because we're talking about charities, KICs, so they can get money elsewhere.
They can. I mean, core costs is often one of the more difficult pieces of that
Exactly.
funding puzzle, and that seems to be the bit that we're looking at reducing. Am I right?
Well, so that's why we're doing a review over the property bit as well, as what we give, because we need to see who is getting what from each different directorate, because at the moment, public health is giving money, social investment is giving reduced adult social care, children's services. It's
So
really
this review is super important for a whole range of reasons. Yes.
Yeah, so realistically, do you think, in general terms, that there is quite a lot of overlap? So when we talk about merging, is that something that could happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think the voluntary sector they've all got to talk to each other and work out whether they can continue on their own or whether it'd be better if they joined up with somebody else.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at the voluntary sector, we're funding Earls Court Youth Club, which we've never funded before.
Yeah.
But they also get funding from children's, because the children's funding came later, and that happened with quite a few groups who applied for the VSSN because they didn't know what was happening in children's. So I think it's just looking at what is being provided. And
I mean,
what
I
the
think
needs are.
that, Youth Club have for a long time known that they've got to get money from elsewhere.
Yeah. Exactly.
But I think that there are some charities who it's kind of quite new to them. They are reliant on what we give them. They think they're doing a good job, and therefore they can't see that the money might not be there in the future. So that's what worries me.
I just wanted to say, with all the charities that currently receive voluntary support fund, part of them getting that fund was that they would be looking at other sources of funding as part of their grant agreement.
Yeah.
So they should know
Yeah.
at this point, and they should have known from 2024 that that's expected of them.
Yeah.
And in fact, we had previously defunded or stopped funding or didn't extend the funding for an organisation because they pretty much did not get funding from anywhere else, and we thought we cannot continue to support an organisation that is so reliant on us. And for all the organisations that we support, and we looked at the figures recently, only one organisation has over 50% of their funding coming from the council. All the rest, it's a lot less than 50% of their funding coming from the council.
But when you do the review and you mention mergers is an option, are you going to be looking at the actual areas of North Kensington Central or whatever to ensure that you further response, which has always been financially interesting, that actually that is providing a service.
Yeah.
And which is unique to that area. There's nobody else duplicating it. And it's hard to see where the closest place would be for those individuals to go. I mean, it's not to say that some of their services might not be reviewed. If they're not generate like their computer after school club may not be functioning, or it might be along with the library. Do you know what I mean? There are different ways of doing it, but that is a concern.
I mean, and just to be clear, we're not telling people they have to merge. I mean, it's totally
No,
up to
but
them what they do.
it may be a direction of travel, but I'm just saying that, with so many services centred on North Kensington, that actually it's important that we do have a spread that covers central and south.
Thank you. So if I may just finish on. I understand, looking at section 3, page 24, that in 2475, the committee's part of what comes to this committee was an underspend of 138,000. And in 25 to 26, there's an underspend of 83,000 forecast. And then when I look 4.2.2 on page 26. Changing the funding arrangement for City Living Local Life is expected to save 204,000. That's
Sorry,
over.
what page is that?
Sorry, it's 26. Now, at the beginning of 4.2.2, we're saying the overall savings for 2026-2027 is 254. The 254 take away 204 leaves 50.
Yeah.
Yep.
Where's the
Yeah,
This
that's
is all,
sorry,
it's all,
So where is the 40 to 50% of the
I don't understand why LED light installation at Kensington
No,
Town Hall is in.
I have that as a question.
I think
that's just
It's a mistake.
academic admin point. But I think I'd like to understand if the total proposed savings for community partnerships, directory communities, consultation and participation is 254, of which 204 is CLLL alone, then where does the voluntary sector community partnerships come into it? Because there's only 50.
The voluntary sector support fund is from 2027, from April 2027.
So those
So
were
the
not,
budget-
so
it's not-
for this year,
yeah, yes.
understood. Thank you very much. That's very helpful. I wanted to ask just quickly on the subject of CLLL. I remember with the budget, and you mentioned it, Sarah. A few years ago, there was a light review of the CLLL, and one of the budget proposals was to cease rolling over any underspend.
Yeah.
That was to deliver a saving, as I understood it.
I'm lifting it up because
Yes, it was the
This is
previous
when you-
member, that's right.
yes, it wasn't to deliver. That wasn't to deliver the
That's
saving.
what I understood at the time as part of that budget scrutiny. But it seems that that money has now gone to a reserve.
Not quite. I'll explain. So the rollover, which is I think it's 980 in the report. So that is the CLLL kind of, I suppose, reserve. And what we do with that reserve is it's still ring-fenced to CLLL, and it just goes back into the CLLL allocation because annually CLLL allocations across the wards is 504,000. The core budget that we do have is 204. So we top up CLLL to the 504 allocation to allow the ongoing ward allocations every year from the underspend.
So our budget,
Yeah.
204, what you said, is actually less than what we know we spend.
No, actually, we
504.
generally spend 200. We've never spent the
So
full
where's the
allocation.
504 come from?
That was if you add up all the allocations across the wards, it comes to 504. But we've never spent 504 even from the start. We've always
So 204 is the actual.
it tends to be how much we spend is
Yes,
around 204.
Understood,
Yeah.
understood, thank you. So the changing of the arrangements is simply that 504, 204 can come out of an additional budget because we already have it currently.
It's sitting as a reserve.
Yeah, and then presumably in the future, like you say, you're thinking CLL might end.
I hope not, but that's something we have to face that it might.
We have to consider, because obviously there are a lot of moving parts and strategic decisions to be made about where we want to place the savings, if you like. And what I understand you're saying is at the moment, the proposal is that in the long term, we may be thinking about placing some of those savings with CLL.
Everything has to be on the table.
Oh, of course it does,
I
absolutely.
mean,
Yes,
I'm not
yes,
saying
yes.
we are.
Yes,
Everything has to be on the table.
understood, thank you. So I think that's the end of my questions. Would anybody, any councillors in the room have a question? No, thank you.
Chair, sorry,
Yes.
councillors.
Oh, yes, please go ahead.
thank you, Chair. I don't know whether it's relevant, but page 20. 2.5, consultants increase. Instead of increase consultants 5%, is there a possibility to raise money from commercial income, like renting council owning properties, land offices, parking for inventories, leasing, rooftops. Parking issues like this because increased council tax is really a burden for many people, many residents. Is it possible to raise funding from other sources?
We're looking at everything. Everything is on the table, as I said. We just have to look at everything right now. And until we really know what we're facing, we can't make any real decisions.
I think that's an important point.
Yeah.
Yes.
My other question is page 23. I'm going 1.8. It was mentioned in Lightham House and someone house. So this a big body housing associations. I don't know how they are linked to the council.
They are our museums.
Mm.
And community, my department is communities and culture, and that includes museums. So Sanborn House and Leighton House are our museums just up the road. And they actually bring in quite a good income every year. So they're one of our income generators that offsets some of the savings that we have to make.
But they're not part of this bit of the
No.
communities department.
And they've gone to the Environment Scrutiny Committee. We've discussed museums and environment, yeah.
So they will have looked at the value for money on the spending
Yes.
on that.
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. I wanted to go back to what Councillor Issa just said, looking at page 20. On the subject of the council tax. There's a general point, but I think this is an important one. We were talking about in aggregate, additional income of 13.8 million. So I don't think this is necessarily a question for you, but I think the committee might like to make a comment on it for the council as a whole. This paper doesn't actually break down the three separate amounts from increasing council tax from the second homes bringing them from the 10% cut to council tax reduction, because I think it would be helpful in terms of scrutinising the budget proposals for committees cross scrutiny to be understanding a bit more detail around that, because it may be that one of those pieces is generating the lion's share of that 13.8. And I think we need to be weighing up the impact upon residents. And that actually reminds me, I had one more question about the impact assessments. So I think it's appendix, is it appendix 4? Appendix 3 is extremely helpful because it gives us the detail of actually what the proposals are. But when we look at appendix 4 on page, say, 37 or 38, we do have some items where the impact is either unknown or possibly to be negative. And I'm just wondering at this point, what, in a very preliminary way, if we already know likely to have negative impact, why are we progressing that proposal before doing the impact assessment? Is that because we don't particularly know what the proposal is? There's not enough detail in the proposal? And if we do an inequalities impact and find out that it's negatively impacting particular protected characteristics, what are we going to do then? Do we go ahead anyway and just be the bad guy? Or is there not some mechanism by which we should be ensuring that we don't have an adverse impact?
So in terms of not knowing, it's potentially negative, but not knowing what the impact is exactly, because we don't know which organisations are going to be impacted at this point, because we haven't come to any decisions on what is going to be the future of Wanted Support Fund or CLLL. But we know that it's going to impact on some organisations, and that will impact on the community. So the closer we are, so we have done a full impact assessment as part of this, and then we will do a review.
Yeah.
Along the way, as we
Detail.
once we have more information about which organisations are going to be impacted, which communities, they will do another impact assessment.
Sure.
And if there's negative impact, it's not necessarily that we will stop the proposal, it's more that we'll look at what kind of mitigation we can put in place to reduce those impacts.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Can I
Joanna,
just say,
yes.
So I had actually got a note alongside 17 in particular, which was the timelines. And I know in the very last sentence you say the next round of voluntary sector support funding is finalised, and I almost felt that actually finalised is almost, here's the decision and here's the project impact, actually, as opposed to it would be useful to see that before it's finalised, so that actually we can understand how we can.
And we do intend to bring a paper. There's a paper coming in January, I think, to the committee around the voluntary support fund, the next round. However, given the timelines and how things fall, and this is what happened the last time with voluntary support fund, we may have to come back between meetings with more information, because at January we will not have the report from the consultation finalized yet. So the draft report needs to be with you for next Monday. So it's not going to have that information in it.
And I think for this committee, it's really important that we have the opportunity to comment on the proposals as they become developed.
Yeah.
Whether that's at the full meeting or whether we find other ways to make sure that we're all kept informed. And can feedback
is going to be too early.
Yeah. So in that case, we need to make sure that as these things progress, that the committee are kept fully informed. That's a request that we make minutes. Because as you say, the impact of it is going to depend very much on things which are not yet arrived at. So yes, very important. Shall we have a look at the communities aspect of A5? Yes. Yes. So
Which page are we on?
A5 begins on page 39.
139, where's the community bit?
It's on page 23
Okay.
at the bottom and then
Begins
there's
at the bottom.
Before we move to this, I would like also to ask a question. It's about temporary accommodation. I don't know if it's relevant. Based on next door, it says household is moved to alternative housing or more affordable temporary accommodation. Could use temporary accommodation.
So perhaps that piece, I think, goes with housing. And
Yes, that's what I was thinking.
Don't worry, we're not skipping that. We're going to come
Okay.
back to that once we finish communities.
Okay.
Excellent, thank you. So starting on page 43, we're looking at the statutory versus non-statutory services.
I recognise that it's all non-statutory, but I think it's very important to agree. Nature, I think that would be my response.
Thank you.
Can I make the general point
Please
here
do.
on the whole paper? It's about statutory versus non-statutory, but in the tables, it's uncontrollable versus controllable expenditure. And in the appendix, we can see that it is mixed. Some of them are mixed, the statutory, both kind of thing. So I think maybe I'm in the wrong part of this, it's not Sarah's part, but I just think in general on this paper, if you label it statutory, non-statutory, that's what you should get. And if there's a mixture of both, that should be in quite a lot of the spending, that relationship should be teased out in the paper. But I mean, that's not specific to communities and culture, that's just a general point. And the reason I'm making it is going to what Joanna was saying. Some of the stuff we know is statutory, we have to spend this money, we have no choice. The question I've got is how much of that statutory spending is also dependent on our discretionary spending. So to what extent, if we were going to just cut, right, and this is the statutory, this is what we have to do, the non-statutory, I mean, how much of that is really essential as well, is what I'm saying.
How much is it facilitating?
How much one thing is dependent on the other, is it facilitating? And so I think this is not just in the communities and culture bits, all all over.
Yeah.
I think that's what we need to know, and that's not what I'm getting from this paper. There's not enough in there.
And I think that's part of the problem is that because different directorates are involved and there are different grants, and whether it's children's, adults, public health, whether it's property, it's really bringing that all together, which is a really, really important piece of work. Because
I mean, and let's be
to get
honest,
the best value, we really need to know who's getting what and what support they have from the council, whether it's through rent subsidies or whatever, whichever grants they're getting.
so we know that we're getting a big cut in our grants. We know that there are certain things we have to spend of statutory expenditure. So we really need to know. I mean, yes, all of it in an ideal world could continue, but how much of our discretionary spending is actually helping us mixed in with the statutory spending to actually deliver a service? That's my question.
Yeah, and we all need to know that. We need to know it. So
Yeah, okay, that's fine.
Councillor
And, I mean, I think we were thinking about this before. And for example, supporting people is non-statutory. So which area should it be linked in? Do you not have, I mean, have
But that's
supporting people and actually adult social
It's
care?
appendix 1 we're looking at, but I think that one is in housing.
No, but I mean, that's the question. Is that supporting people could be part of communities and it could be part of adult social care. So actually, if it's considered to be non-statutory, what is the element within that category that validates it? Really? So, and then it's not, and that's not the.
I think that somebody might tell me if I'm wrong. The supporting people is the name of like a programme which is within housing. So,
Yes,
whether communities are doing something similar is another question.
whether you do that bit
We'll
in
do that one
housing.
with
Yeah,
housing.
yeah,
Thank you,
yeah.
Linda.
Okay.
Yes, she's too.
In communities, on page 46, you talk about controllable and non-controllable, uncontrollable. Is the uncontrollable contracts you've already committed to? Or is it money from other departments? What falls into uncontrollable and what's in controllable?
Some of it is, so for example, DD&T, IT, facilities management, there's some things like that that we can't control, that we have to actually cover the cost of. And also in some cases, staffing as well. Some of that is uncontrollable expenditure. So there's a myriad of things, but I can go in, come back with specifics as to break this down so that you can have more the detail of that information. That's what I mean.
Yes, good. Thank you. Yes. Excellent.
Thank you. So uncontrollable then, does that essentially, as the question is raised, we can't make any savings? That they're fixed sums in effect, whether statutory or non-statutory, that they're fixed in some form or other and we can't make savings from.
I think
Could
there's,
you give that
Depends
example?
what they are.
yes, and there are efficiencies. So it's not that you can say, well, we're going to cut 50%. I think there are efficiencies that can be made through uncontrollable. And so savings can be made in that way, rather than just saying we're going to do a cut. You have to review it and see where we can possibly do things better so it doesn't cost as much.
Okay, the marginal savings potentially, but by and large, you believe those are things that we will have to spend on. You can't substantially.
It might be helpful if for communities and also for housing, if we had like a list, a table of the statutory expenditure in this directorate, if we could actually see what we have to do, rather than IT or extra things for staff. And obviously you need staff because nothing happens without staff. But it would be quite helpful to see what we statutorily have to provide from your directorate and from the housing directorate. a breakdown?
It would be, and I think part of the reason why we asked for this paper was to be able to understand exactly that in the context of budget pressures going forwards. And I think there are perhaps some questions that we have as a committee which might be able to be answered by Neil over there with more of a finance and to be able to really clarify the sort of the cross-cutting between controllable versus uncontrollable and statutory versus non-statutory. Because I think those are two different kind of dimensions, if you like, two different factors. And I think it's really important as a community that we feel confident that we understand both. The thing that this paper has really shown to me is the level of complexity, because even if we had, as Councillor Rossi has suggested, a very clear breakdown, literally for what is statutory, what is non-statutory. Within that non-statutory, there will be things which are helping to deliver the statutory in a more efficient way. So it's not as simple as just saying, well, this can possibly be done without, and this cannot. Actually, they kind of cross over. And plus, although we say within communities that comes to this committee, it's not necessarily anything which is statutory as such. I think things do become statutory by implication when public commitments are made by a local authority. So where we have things such as the council plan, where we have things such as the inquiry commitments and other commitments made in the last 8 years, say, I think they imply or entail a reasonable expectation, I think it's under the Localism Act, that they become in effect binding. So that's a whole other sort of layer of what counts as statutory and what's not statutory. And I think we are sort of edging towards hopefully getting a clearer understanding and a clearer picture of what things go into what category. But I don't think we're there yet.
And it's going to be really difficult.
It's super complicated.
We
yes.
are somewhere we never thought we were going to be in July. I think we've got quite a shock. And
Does anyone else on the committee have questions on this part?
Right?
I haven't come to you yet.
Oh, no,
Okay, so we'll-
moving swiftly on without me.
No, I would never do
Thank
that.
you.
No, I would never do that. Just one quick comment before we do move to councillors in the room, is to be mindful of how all of this is going to fit with transformation and our transformation programme, but it's not specifically a community's point.
But actually, I think this gives us an opportunity to transform what we do, how we work with the voluntary sector. It's not just about savings, it's actually how everybody transforms, the council and the voluntary sector.
And transformation, of course, entails not only savings and efficiency, but it also
Better
entails
services.
outcomes and service delivery. So excellent, thank you. So in that case, I will move on to ask, are there any councillors in the room, not on the committee, who have a question or comment?
Oh,
yes,
Madam Chairman, thank you. My comment is about the presentation of the data again, which others have raised. In the OSC paper we had on statutory, non-statutory, we actually had a column on where the money came from, because sometimes if the money is coming straight from a pass-through grant to the item, then in a sense it's cost neutral to us and we shouldn't be bothering about it rather than turning. I mean, I don't imagine we get to the stage where we turn down a grant just to reduce our expenditure. But also in this column of uncontrollable expenditure, arguably all expenditure is controllable. This might contain recharges, but if you stop doing the service altogether, you won't have any recharges. And similarly, recharges, I mean, if that's what this mainly is, and that again isn't clear, and so I don't think there's enough information about the recharges in this to really fully understand it. And so those are 2 comments I was going to make. Maybe really more thoughts for future presentation to better understand it.
And I know with the community safety paper that's coming to us, it does show where we passport money on.
Well, in fact, yes, when I refer to that, I'm thinking the draft papers that I've seen that do that. Sorry, rather than.
Sorry, yes,
so
it is a
that's actually reality. So that you absolutely reminded me. So I'm sort of looking ahead. But when I looked at those, which officers were presenting the information, it was incredibly helpful. Might be helpful here.
Thank you, Councillor Will. So I'm wondering whether there is, not specifically just for communities, but overall on this paper, whether there is learning from what has been presented to other committees, that we might like our papers to be more in line with what's come to other committees. And perhaps that's a note that can be taken forward future papers. So if we don't have any further questions on this paper, thank you both very much for coming, and we shall move to the housing elements. And we are going back now to paper A4, the housing, social investment and property elements of that paper.
Thank you, Chair. Just before I start, if I may, we've spoken about this briefly, because obviously we've had trouble accessing all the data recently. And we did say to the committee that we would bring back more information about our major works, our list of major works, which is one of the minutes actions, and then also especially wanted it to be part of the HRA budget. With your permission, Chair, if I could share this old-fashioned printed out document of some, just to give you an idea of some of our major works from December to May coming up. That's right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So you've talked to HRA, we're doing general fund.
Yeah, no, but I just thought to get the
Okay.
papers out, get those out so they can have them.
Thank you for that. So this report is being presented to the Housing and Community Select Committee as part of budget scrutiny work being undertaken by the Budget Working Group for the 26-27 budget. Councillor McVeigh will present this report alongside Dan Hawthorne, Alton Smiley and Christine Addison and Ian Isaac. Thank you all very much for coming and welcome. Would any of you like to introduce the paper to us?
Thank you, Chair. I think the paper's pretty self-explanatory, so I'm happy just to go straight into any questions. Thank you.
Splendid.
Yeah,
I think my comment is the comment I made before, so everyone's already heard it, that in a paper about statutory and non-statutory, it does not feature. And there is confusion amongst us as to what is controllable and what isn't, and there's no definition of such. So in general terms, there's not enough clarity in this paper or detail, I think, for us to really assess properly.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I think we may be coming back to that question because we are starting with the A4, paper A4, which is the previous paper. It's very confusing.
I'm on the wrong one, am I?
Yeah, it's confusing because we're splitting the papers.
Okay, sorry, forget all of that then.
That's it. So we're from page, starting on page 19.
This doesn't even have the.
Yes, we're used to having a yellow page in between each one. Which
Yeah, but it
helps
usually
us.
says April, which these don't.
Yeah.
So it's a bit
It
confusing for
is,
us.
it is.
Bear
It
in mind,
is.
cyber has challenged all the
I
offices.
know.
Yes.
I know, but us,
Yes.
different people. Okay.
Did I
Sorry.
see your hand up, Councillor Dunn?
Thank you. Page 30, the penultimate table and the operational estate work stream, seems to be 236,000 is accurate. That's a substantial sum. Is that, would you like to talk us through?
Yeah, so all of the headings here
are savings that we've been working very hard on over the course of this year, which we're putting under the heading of savings and transformation. So in some areas, we know exactly what we need to do to, so there's a specific proposal, but we had a target that was bigger than the proposal. So it's just where we're still working our way through it. And we hope to be able to get the proposals fully covered by the end of the year.
I appreciate this is really your first full year in Ron, is that right? In terms of, were you ever ambitious at the start, or was it you?
It's not my first year, and I think we've not been put in a position before where savings has been the focus of what we're doing. So what we've got is actually what I will describe as the first tranche of more deliverable savings than we'll get in future years if we have to do this exercise again. So I don't think this was over ambitious. I think it is deliverable. You will see from elsewhere in the papers that we are delivering on the commercial portfolios. We've got a number of proposals around increasing commercial rents. These are ways of not reducing services, but by managing our property more effectively. And we have made improvements that will allow us to make the savings that we're targeting.
It's a category of saving, unlike some others, where rather than having, as it were, an itemised list of things where you know exactly how you're going to make the saving, it was an overall target set with a view to then working through the year to find the specific components that would make it up, if you see what I mean, which is why you're kind of at the point that the decision is made to take the saving. We had this conversation last year about this saving, and you'd said, what are the specific components of this? We just said, we're not sure yet, that work is still going on, you see what I mean? Whereas other elements of it, and I think in a world where we have to make savings at the scale we have to, I think we have to accept to a certain extent that some of them are saying, right, we'll take a kind of educated view about what we think is achievable and then work through the details during the course of the rest of the year.
So going forward, we recognise that we've got, certainly in our current budget proposals, £5 million gap, and therefore savings we put forward have to be deliverable, particularly from 26-27. So this £250,000 million that we're not going to meet this year, we can't replicate that across portfolios next year. How much certainty and clarity do you have that when you're putting figures in the next year's budget, and this is much to Dan than to solve and to yourself, are actually achievable as opposed to we only managed half of it?
It's just as Dan said, we have targets that we have to try to stretch ourselves, and we have to identify what we're going to save as we go. I don't think these are entirely unrealistic. I think that some of them are going to be harder to achieve than others in the course of the year, but we'd anticipate that we might overachieve on some. So where we might perhaps aim to rent out a bit of our operational property that we haven't previously rented out, that may come in a bit slower, but something else may come in a bit faster. So in the round, we'd anticipate that we've identified headings. Under each of these headings, and I haven't got a list with me, unfortunately, to remind myself of exactly what's under the headings, but we have a series of sort of tasks, like things that we have to look at to flush out as many savings as we can.
And it's worth emphasising that where you, in that Appendix 1, where there's a figure in that saving at risk column, it's marked as amber, that's not because we know we aren't going to hit it, it's because we can't say that we've already hit it at this point in the year. See what?
On the same topic of how realistic some of these savings are, so one, for example, managing high cost TA placements, where the idea is that will save £500,000, £550,000 in 26-27. Again, how realistic is that? If you talk about 100 households, you know how incredibly hard it is to move people on in those sorts of situations. Do we really believe that it is realistic? That will save £500 million in 26-27, similarly on some of the other ones on maximising housing income? Is it more likely than not that these are, they're ambitious targets, but
So
realistically?
thank you for that. It's a good challenge. And I just wanted to pay credit to the team because as you see from this paper, the TA costs are the ones that are setting not just this budget out, but a lot of the entire council budget out. And we've had to put a growth bit in for £5 million. And I just want to pay credit to the team because under Alton, they have managed to actually reduce the numbers of TA accommodations down to, unfortunately, it's gone up again since the cyber incidents, but before the cyber incident, it's down to 1,912, which is extraordinary when you think about so many new people coming in as well. So the team have actually managed to really, really work on this. And I'll leave Alton to talk about more of the detail. But so your answer to that is yes, and we need to be ambitious. We need to keep working on that. And you know very well in your ward that it is challenging with high cost placements, but sometimes the cost doesn't necessarily indicate that the level of support that person needs. Sometimes they're in a high cost placement when they don't need to be in a high cost placement.
Yeah. So specifically on the high cost placements, we've done a lot of targeted work around one of the most expensive other than commercial hotels, which we brought that down to single figures. The next sort of expensive form of temporary accommodation is called nightly lets, and we've got one of the lowest sort of nightly lets rates in London. So we've managed to reduce the number of expensive nightly lets accommodation to the last time when the figures sort of were able to get figures was in the 80s, which from when we started in the year was over 100, and then those placements are significantly expensive, and that trajectory. So what the team of what we are doing is to try and really target that trajectory, because the nature of that placement is not the best outcome for the residents themselves, because it's quite transient. The landlords want to charge the highest rent possible. So what we're trying to do is get a high proportion of households in what we call leased accommodation that's got more stability and more. It's not ideal still, because ultimately everybody needs to be in settled accommodation, as Soph mentioned. There's a lot of work going in so that we can put support households to move into settled accommodation, whether it's private rentals or social housing where possible.
So you think actually it may well be realistic?
Yeah, so this year's target in terms of specifically the ones that we've already hit about 2/3 of its on target. Obviously, the cyber impacts will have sort of some implication, but we
and for example, we had 2 households in service departments, which is incredibly expensive, and we have managed to, thanks to Alton and the officers, managed to move them on to other much more suitable and less expensive accommodation.
I just stay on the topic of TA there. So another item here is in investment in TA pension funds. We'll discuss that lens at full council recently as well. I think that's going to be capital investment from the pension fund and something else. How were these savings arrived at, though? Why do we think next year we might save £1 million?
The simple story is that if you're procuring TA in the market, you are you're paying a rent to the landlord, and then you're reclaiming from the government a proportion of that rent, and that proportion of the rent is at the so-called TA subsidy rate, with 90% of 27 local housing allowance, which is it costs the council money, because there's a big gap between those two numbers, and that gap is getting bigger. The way that the pension fund arrangement will work is that it helps us in 2 ways. Firstly, because of the nature of the arrangement, we can claim we can claim full NHA, not the TA subsidy rate, so we can claim a large amount from the government. But also the arrangement we've got with the pension fund is that the repayments we will make to the pension fund will be entirely contained within that income we get on the NHA side, so there's no gap. So there's no subsidy that the council has to pay from its own pocket for any household that is placed in that accommodation we've got through the pension fund. So every household moved from market procured TA into one of those blocks, we're no longer having to bridge a gap between what we get from the government in benefit terms and what we have to pay to the landlords.
Okay, so in fact the government is paying for this.
No, it's a lower cost.
Okay.
But you're right that we get more subsidy from the government, and by bringing those two things closer to each other, we close the gap in the council.
Okay. I think probably a broader conversation around how that works, but I think I understand. Yeah. See, if you're making £1 million saving.
It's a big number and a lot hangs on you. Yeah.
The property, which we're working full speed ahead to get.
Is it possible for you to explain how you've managed to reduce the night lets, because we know there's a demand. So did you change your criteria on which you'd accept people or they qualified? I mean, how did it work?
So the way that we have managed to reduce the 90 lets is again by targeting sort of from a procurement point of view, is helping people to move on, whether it is through partnerships that we have in place with other organizations, with people who are in other areas that may want to remain in other areas because they've been there. So it's all voluntary. So we're working dedicated, targeted work with the families themselves. And I think that has gotten us really good outcomes for the families, because I am a firm believer that the best outcome for the family is often the best outcome for the council as well. And I think it's on that sort of on that basis that the team will work. But I think the key has been really engaging with families at the point of because often we engage at the point of a crisis, and often you don't get the best outcomes for the families at the point of crisis. So doing targeted support on a basis where we are sitting down, talking to the family, coming to an arrangement with the family about the best outcome for them, that's where we managed to get,
But has there been, I can't see that there's been a reduction of people presenting.
No, so there isn't a reduction. So we have really good outcomes in terms of helping people move into private rented accommodation. There's only like I think less than 5% of private rented that's affordable in London, and yet the team, we have put a lot of effort and as much resource as we can to sort of help people as they come in to then move into settled accommodation. Equally, we work with agencies. We've got cultivated some really good, strong partnerships. Yes, often social housing outcomes for houses as well, and that's been really positive. And so all we had an example earlier where non-statutory and statutory. A lot of the non-statutory elements, they do help in terms of the prevention, because I can go into what the statutory is to set up. We can we'll be here all time.
It may be that some of that detail would still be beneficial to the committee, and maybe that we'd like to ask for feedback at some point.
On what specific?
Well, on the aspect around the how that £1 million came with the increased subsidy, and how we bring those two cost elements together. It might be helpful to have some clarity on that. Mr. Gardner.
Two questions. Alton and the teams, very well done on the work, and I think it's been impressive. I was tracking it through all the papers with the motion the other day, and actually it's very noticeable. Well done. I did want to talk. You talk about maximising housing income on Appendix 3, and you talk about 10-year term lengths, which is increasing from I think 5 to then almost 7, and then now you're looking at 10-year lengths. Do we then also, over a period of time, actually then take on responsibility for buildings, or are we only taking on flats within the buildings?
That's the 10-year less, 10-year plus. It's to do with the housing benefit legislation, and which sort of enables the councils to claim the full subsidy. And it's the technicalities of it are around where those leases are held, which unlocks sort of certain cells within the housing benefit legislation, which means you can claim the full subsidy.
But we don't take on landlord responsibility.
No,
it's still the lease.
It's just the lease, the agreement that we have. So now you'll have agreement, say like for 3 years. We just have a longer agreement, and if we opt out, we can hand it back. We can do all the things that we wouldn't sort of take on a liability for the property, indefinitely.
But the threshold for those benefits to kick in is 10 years.
Yeah. Exactly. So that's why it needs to be 10 year plus 1 day. It could be 15, 20, but it's 10 years plus 1 day that sort of unlocks it.
If I might ask a question for Christine. On page 33, social investment, 26, 27, which was now 117,000 to retain the function, it's funding from other sources, e.g. Section 106 annual social value contribution. Would you like to talk more about that? Because I don't really understand whether that is taking money away that would otherwise be going into other things that are better for the benefit of the local community under section 106.
Yeah, I don't know that I can know what might have happened otherwise, but essentially, this is a relatively low cost to provide social investment strategy, which I think you've looked at here. If we continue with it can be only on the basis that we find alternative sources of funding from it. So the discussions that have taken place, and it's not firmed up, but it's close, is where there is, I don't like to describe it as surplus section 106, but unallocated. That's probably the right way of saying it. Currently unallocated section 106 that is actually in the employment area. Whether or not we're able to use that, and that's what's being explored here. If we can't find alternative ways of doing it, so it's a section 106, but there's also where we've got contracts where there may be a social value element of it, it may make sense that some of that is actually done through the work that we're doing.
I mean, there's a whole strand for kind of sector transformation, which I've been kind of overseeing, which is done exactly, it's basically this kind of substitution methodology, effectively, where you identify things that you're spending general fund revenue on, and you identify other sources of income, whether it's public health grant or section 106 money or other things which you can substitute out and therefore make a general fund saving. It is absolutely unavoidably true that there is an opportunity cost there, that there's something else possibly you could have, there's something over and above, something extra you could have spent that money on, which you're instead using for that substitution effort. And I think to an extent that's an inevitable consequence one has to accept of the situation that we're in, if you see what I mean, where we're not in a world where we can be choosing to do new things because we're actually having to retrench and trying to shore up the things that we're already doing. You see what I mean?
I think as a ward councillor, I just ask for transparency.
Yeah.
Because if there is that lost opportunity within a ward, then or within a central pool, then I think we would like to know that it actually can be.
No, I understand. I understand it. Yeah, and like Christine says, it's impossible to kind of hypothesize about all the different things as it were that money could have paid for. But as a general principle, to articulate what we're substituting and what kind of other categories of thing might have been eligible for that money.
I just want to answer, so that section 106, actually, I'm the spend manager for that section 106, and it's very limited what it can be spent on. So it's not that it's a general fund that can be spent on anything it can't. And the spend that we're identifying for social investment, it falls within the category of what we can spend that money on.
Can I ask, following on from that, where does that leave our social investment strategy? Is there any impact?
No,
on
so
that strategy?
what this does is retain the team, retain the function, and retain the work. I think I'm right in saying, I would need to check this, that the strategy itself has got one more year left to run it, so we need to update it kind of relatively soon in any case. But the strategy for now remains adopted and intact, and the team is still working on it, including in the context of the work that Moira was describing earlier, in working very closely with Moira's team, for example, on supporting how we investigating how we use property to support BCS.
Any other member of the committee have any questions? That's the easy.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to ask a general question. Are you planning to increase the rent of residents?
Well, that comes onto the next. So
Okay.
the paper on the HRA, which is our next agenda item, does include a proposal to increase the rent. So we can talk about that in more detail in line with what's permitted by government. So short answer is yes, but we can talk more about that in the next.
Thank you. I have a couple, if I may. I think, as always, the devil is in the detail, and Appendix 3 is a crucial part of this paper, with the proposals, the savings proposals. I just wanted to flag a couple of these here. We're looking at reducing the budgetary commitment to supported housing. I'm looking on page 32. And I think as a committee we are concerned, and we have mentioned some concerns this year around the support that's being provided in supported housing. So on paper and off the top of my head, I would want to sound a bit of a note of caution on that in terms of the impact that that's going to be. I mean, it may be that you can reduce the budgetary commitment without reducing what support there is.
Well, and we are ourselves cautious about it, which is one of the reasons that it's only profiled in the fourth year, as you can see, because this is really critical work that supports some of the most vulnerable people at risk of homelessness, but also crucially is preventing homelessness. And it's a good example of the kind of upstream prevention that Alison was talking about. And that even though, there are large parts of it probably that you would class as non-statutory, but nevertheless it's both good value for money and achieving better outcomes. And exactly, I agree exactly with what you've said, and that's exactly how we frame this work. We need to find ways to use this money more efficiently without reducing the kind of positive impact of the outcomes. And so we've given ourselves time to do that really carefully. The other reason why it's backloaded is because a lot of that, in fact, the large majority of that money is already committed in contracts that run through a large part of that period. So what we do now is the design work, and then we implement it as those contracts expire, and you achieve the efficiencies at the end period, but very much in the spirit of what.
So I don't know if Alton wants to add anything more to this as well, but it's also 3 years down the line, because not just because of the contracts, but also we're looking at working closely with adult social care, because this I know comes out. Hamish is nodding, because a lot of our support in housing, we work very closely with adults who are most in need. I don't know how that's going on.
Yeah, so so there's different degrees of complexities in support in housing, and what we're looking to do is that there's some contracts which are up for renewal in 2028, and we are looking at opportunities where we can consolidate some of them so that we can achieve the savings while minimizing the impact on the service, and looking for any partnership, with adults and others to make sure that this vital support function that is in place for our most vulnerable residents, which keeps our roughly numbers really low in the borough, also prevents people, because it's not just about a substitute for temporary accommodation. There's a lot of the residents who are not quite ready to live independently in temporary accommodation, and the design here is the objective is to sort of help them get ready. So we're reviewing the pathway as well to see how the referral routes as well as the move on sort of options are. So the next 3 years will be crucial for us to really get this pathway as streamlined as it needs to be, so that throughput is efficient.
Thank you. So there were just a couple of others in this list. The Grenfell Housing Services. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that. It does say we're removing a layer of management.
So this is an unusual. You might have spotted this is a housing management function, and it's unusual that it appears in the general fund budget. The reason for that is that, as you may know, that a large number of the homes that were acquired for Grenfell survivors immediately after the fire were acquired into the general fund rather than to the HRA, and therefore the management of them is managed in the general fund. Rents come in and the management costs go out of the general fund. And this we had to be really careful with this saving. There is, of course, an imperative to find efficiency savings wherever we can in the council, but we were really clear that here more than anywhere else, we had to be sure that we weren't making a change that would have an adverse impact on the people being served by this service because of the particular duty that we owe them. And in fact, the changes, the general approach in the Grenfell Housing Service is that there are residents who use the service who are part of the kind of management decisions, if you see what I mean. So they have very high level of kind of very sophisticated resident engagement. And so residents were very closely involved in the changes to the management design to ensure that there wasn't, as it were, a frontline impact. So this really is an example of taking out a layer of management very carefully whilst ensuring that we're not affecting the residents, the service residents are getting. And the residents have been really clear with us that if they do see that change, they will let us know, and we'll have to think about how we can restore that to where it needs to be.
Thank you. So I'm trying to understand from what's written here is that saving being realised by reducing staff costs has been reinvested in additional frontline resource to support key areas.
So, yes,
So it's not really a saving as such.
I think
It's
what you're,
more a kind of moving around the resource.
so I think what you're saying is that it's been a bit of both. We've managed to make sufficient savings that we were able to reinvest some of the savings in services and still achieve this wouldn't be appearing here if there wasn't some cash saving along the lines of the numbers that are described. What we're saying is that in total we can also reinvest a bit of what's saved in kind of shoring up the rest of the team, if you see.
Is that like a mitigation?
Yeah, yes, but that's one way of looking at it. It was the change that we felt was necessary to the design of the team in order to be able to give the confident answer that I gave to your first question.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And then finally, I just wanted to say something about the pension fund investment in TA. So you mentioned blocks, and Sof has said there that we're moving along in the journey of identifying suitable properties. I'm concerned that there may be a risk here that if it were the case that the particular property, the suitability of the particular property were not as we would all hope it to be, that may be a false economy with a pension fund. So I would like to ask, can we as a committee be kept appraised of developments towards identifying potential and suitable properties to invest that pension fund money in?
Yeah, short answer, yes. So we obviously we're operating in a market, so to a certain extent we're having to move.
I just don't know time-wise, Chair. It's gonna be feasible. I mean,
Where's that?
my understanding is that, well, we're December now, halfway through December. My understanding is.
I mean, have we purchased some?
No.
Well, then,
But my understanding is that we have to purchase something by, is it?
Yeah, I don't think we can do it. I don't think we can keep you appraised by virtue of a report to a meeting. So it might be that we have to find some
that's
other
not
way
what I
of
was
doing it.
suggesting.
Yeah.
I mean, presumably it goes to other committees for the decision.
So I think I'm right in saying that the individual acquisitions, you get this right, Alison will help me if I'm not wrong, are delegated to Mike Curtis, the Executive Director of Finance, in consultation with the Chair of the Investment Committee, Councillor Marshall. And but we are working very closely, kind of property team, the housing needs team, and the finance team that supports the investment committee on reaching that advice collectively. And in fact, housing management is involved as well, because there's a homelessness angle, obviously, because that's the service that we're principally serving. But housing management colleagues will be managing the homes. Christine's team will be managing the property, finding the properties and managing the transactions. There's a huge amount, to your point about quality, there's a huge amount of work that we need to do up front to ensure that we're buying homes that meet our standards, and not only, as it were, our standards from the point of view of homes that we've prepared to house people in TA, but also that are kind of the investment committee are confident in, are a sound investment position, from their point of view. So it isn't straightforward. There's a lot of moving parts, but as Councillor May says, we're kind of.
So we as a housing fund are not buying these properties. So we are checking them, as Dan said, and as Alton's going through them with a fine-tooth comb to check that they meet our requirements for our clients, that we're kind of in a way representing.
And will that be in terms of bedroom numbers? In terms of requirements?
Yes.
Everything. Bedroom numbers,
so we look
accessibility.
We look at our needs and
Location.
temporary accommodation, and we look at where our needs are and any proposals that we've looked at. We've looked at a number of proposals that haven't been considered because speaking to a bed size that is not sort of what the requirement is. So we're very much consulting with all different parts of this with one another to make sure that the investment is sound and it's one that we can use.
And location is another factor. I mean, apart from everything else, it will need to meet the suitability requirements of the house legislation.
Exactly.
Exactly. Most people know.
Even if that bar is quite low. So who's actually sourcing properties? Which bit of the council is going out to?
Christine's team has got that brief from Alton. And is then doing the work in the market to find the prospects, and then provides advice to Mike and the investment committee, who then make the decisions about it.
And just making sure that we're identifying properties that are available, can be bought within the timetable, meet all of the criteria that Alton is setting in terms of needs, but also in terms of building standards, meet the criteria that we have as a council. so that we would be comfortable to put our residents in them. And so all of those things together means it's been a bit of a journey to identify. So we've had a number of properties that we've been exploring and that we hope to be able to finalise before the end of the financial year, but it is going to be quite tight. But we would be able to provide information in the form of a briefing around the standards
Just
that
an
we're
update,
looking at,
yeah,
just so that
that
the
would be helpful.
committee has some assurance.
Thank you. Councillor Wade?
I'm just intrigued about the acquisition process, insofar as we know that as a result of Grenfell properties were acquired. And we know that at least 14 were acquired, which didn't fit, weren't suitable. What would the learning the department have as to how they approach it? Because you've got our markets down at the moment, it's probably quite a, but actually, what are the safeguards you're putting in place in order that that problem isn't replicated? And that if you do acquire, that you do dispose of properties that are not fit for purpose sooner, another 7 years.
I mean, I think there's two things. One is that the building standards have changed in that time, so that means that whatever is being built and accepted from a planning point of view from in other areas, not in our own borough, will be of a higher standard than properties that were acquired in unusual circumstances and in quite a hurry after Grenfell. Some mistakes, I think, recognise some mistakes were made with the type of properties that we've not been able to use as a result. So all of that learning about what is suitable and making sure that we've got the right standards there has been employed here. So everything we have almost like a specification of requirements that that the properties have to meet. So everything we're doing is new. So we're not buying old properties, we're buying new properties. So
increasingly we're buying so that acquisition programme was loads and loads of individual street properties. We're buying kind of single blocks, so it makes the job of kind of the due diligence much more straightforward because we're running tests on one or two or three. And the other critically important thing is that we now have, which we didn't at that time, one of the strongest fire safety teams that local authority has in the country, and they are very closely involved in looking in detail at the buildings.
So what is the distance when you acquire something? What is the distance from, for example, here that you're looking at? I mean, is it 50 miles?
It's done more by travel time than by
Something along those lines, yeah. So we're looking at sort of in London. That's where we're looking because 80% of our temporary accommodation placements are out of borough. So aligned with that, we're looking sort of in pretty much sort of that same perimeter where we already had temporary accommodation placements. So it's because it has to fit with our placement policy with the suitability requirements. So it's all tested in the sense through our existing placements.
How does that work with the borough that you're going to be acquiring? Insofar as how do you retain your nomination rights?
It's not social housing, so it's not done in terms of nomination rights. It's outside of any kind of social housing nominations arrangement. Because TA doesn't. It's not part of that.
So it's not part of a Section 106. It's Section 106 that gives the nomination rights. So this is outside of Section 106.
There is a standard protocol which we follow, whereby within London we notify each other of when we're placing in another borough. That's absolutely standard practice because, of course, even though we retain responsibility for those residents from a housing obligation point of view, if there are, for example, social care needs in that household, they would be picked up by the host borough because that's how the social care system works. So there's a very clear protocol which all boroughs are signed up to in order to make sure that it's done in a way which is not it's kind of open and doesn't come as a surprise to the.
And just to clear, sort of as Christine said, we are not acquiring Section 106 properties that would come with any nomination rights. We are just sort of acquiring private market.
And we are not acquiring. We've got to get that clear. Our housing team is not acquiring. So it's no different from any other TA arrangement, which we already have 80% of our TA out of borough already.
I mean, but one of the reasons why I asked is because it was this case of Camden using hotels, but not actually informing the borough that they'd placed their quite vulnerable temporary accommodation. I mean, the complex needs, I think, probably is something we've taken that up with them. So that's the reason why I asked about the etiquette when you're placing people in another borough.
Yeah, we do it and we expect others to do it for us.
There's notification. There is actually a requirement to notify. And it's important that all
Has anybody
authorities.
took count of?
I'll tell them
We told them that.
So we've learned quite a lot about the proposed pension fund investment in temporary accommodation, which I did not know before, which is very helpful. So thank you very much for that. We're looking at blocks, not street properties.
Yeah.
We're looking at borough, and we're looking at new build. With that in mind, again, I would like to sound a note of caution around new builds. Given how many new builds turn out to be defective and uninsurable, in some cases uninhabitable and risky. So I'm sure that the team are very mindful of that. We know sometimes that certificates of compliance may not actually be worth what they are made of. So
Yeah,
I think
we've got some live
this is
prospects.
something we need to be extremely careful of, and I do hope it won't be available with any form of unacceptable external wall insulation in particular. Even if it looks like it looks, I don't think that's going to be very welcome.
So again, Chair, just to reassure you what Dan said, just to repeat what he said about our fire safety team and our requirements as a council. We are absolutely looking at every single one of those aspects.
To the extent it gives you any comfort, we have rejected a few prospects for precisely the kind of reasons. that you described. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Are we looking to acquire leaseholds or freehold? That's the key reason to ask that is
Freehold.
ongoing costs and liability for any capital expenditure on the building.
It's
Is the pension fund going to essentially, as the landlord in effect, going to be covering the expense?
So the short answer is freeholds. So that and this one crazy, I think that I wouldn't be comfortable in acquiring a leasehold, and you've asked you buying blocks that makes it easier to get freehold. The way that we're working it is that all of those maintenance costs, that is, as it were, day-to-day repair costs, but also kind of longer term, like because this is a 50-year arrangement, so there are kind of longer term cyclical repairs that you need to do as well. That will all be covered by the council. So a proportion of the income that we receive from the LHA rents, a proportion of that is paid as it were rent to the pension fund, but we retain a significant chunk effectively as to cover the costs of management and as a sinking fund for the maintenance of the building for life.
Presumably it's actually housing benefit.
Yeah, it's LHA, so we
Do you mean sorry? So if you own the property, you manage the property, does that mean that you will be supporting the individuals within the street?
well, in the same way we support any household. And it's probably worth saying that kind of, although there may be some cases where this isn't what happens, the starting assumption is that it will be our housing management team who are managing in blocks as well, which is a degree of kind of control, influence and oversight that we haven't got in a lot of RTA. Yes, I've got managing agents who are understood.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My group first question, appendix 4, first paragraph. Says you need using temporary accommodation to alternative accommodation, temporary accommodation to produce a budget. Be realistic and transparent. You know there is no budget in our borough where you want to get this according an alternative accommodation and how.
So this is the high cost placements that we were talking about. So we have a proportion, which is about 4% of our temporary accommodation, which is these 90 lets, which are very, very expensive at a huge cost to the council. And it is those properties, in the same way that the other 96% is in still expensive, but much less expensive temporary accommodation. This work stream is focusing on that 4% proportion to try and find alternative temporary accommodation that is either one of the alternatives will hopefully be the pension fund properties. So we can remove, but even without that, we are already working with those to move those households on into cheaper accommodation.
But you're right, that cheaper accommodation will often not be, and more often not be.
Yes.
The affordability of accommodation here is for the rents that we can afford to pay on the system.
Thank you. Do any councillors in the room have any questions? Thank you. So in that case, we will move on to the second part of the housing and social investment property part, which is paper 5, A5, which is statutory versus non-statutory. And we do have Neil Isaac here, who hopefully will be able to assist with any technical questions.
Claire, before we get into it, we listened to what you said at communities, and we've taken on board and a lot of the discussions, and particularly what Councillor Rossi said about making it much clearer about what is statutory, what's not statutory, what's controllable, what's not controllable. And again, what Councillor Wheel said about being clear about what the purpose of this paper is. And it's changed from the draft I saw, but we still think it needs a lot more clarity. So I think definitely, but while we've got Neil here, I'm sure we can answer some of the questions, particularly amongst the ones which I thought was very important to know about we've got a column in there called income. It'd be much easier to break that down into what's grants and what isn't.
Yeah, it's the first year we've done this paper, and I guess it's really helpful to get the feedback on how you found it and how it might change in future years. I guess the other thing I'd say is that you could probably write quite a bulky paper under each of the headings here, if you see it. So to go into, for example, the statutory and non-statutory breakdown of homelessness prevention work, that's a report in itself. Yeah. So partly, I think, very self-consciously, what we were doing here is doing a kind of headline analysis so that you could identify the areas into which you wanted to dive a bit deeper, either as part of this discussion or at some part of the rest of your work programme. But there's almost infinite detail that we can unpack underneath this, and so we wanted to know which areas we were particularly interested in order to be able to inform.
And if I may also, what came up earlier when someone asked about section 106 in regards to the social investment aspect, again, we talk about section 106, we talk about public health, we talk about so many other kind of grants. It's just to have pulling together all that information. As Dan says, would be a huge amount of work, but something I think in each department we're all very mindful of, that this is what we're trying to do. And so we're all going to be going after the public health, or we're all going to be going after section 106, and then grant.
And that's right, it's a bit of corporate oversight, which is what we're trying to do.
Turn to my committee, Councillor Gardner.
Thank you. It's back to the controllable and uncontrollable, and I was none the wiser.
We might actually ask an accountant to try and.
I'll give it a go if I may, Chair. So the way we budget and council here is every service comes to either OSC or to individual scrutiny committees and gets the budget reviewed. So, for example, Mike goes to OSC to talk about GDAT, legal, finance, and the uncontrollable costs are to show the true cost of the service that the frontline service provides. We have to allocate the overheads across the services. But the uncontrollable costs are, for example, finance's time, which is charged to Altin to do the accountancy for Altin, and that's scrutinised when Mike comes to OSC in terms of finance support. So we don't do it twice, but we do show the full cost of the service by including the uncontrollable and controllable. There are other bits like capital financing charges are uncontrollable, support services, legal costs, and depreciation where there's an asset, because that's fixed outside of what's controllable. So what we're trying to do for your committee, Chair, is to strip out what would be charged through and scrutinised elsewhere to the core of the direct provision of the services that's provided under the remit of the communities and housing.
So going back to what someone said before, I think the stuff which is managed here is uncontrollable. There probably are senses in which it is controllable, but they're controllable, as it were, at the corporate centre by people managing treasury management.
Absolutely.
Or
And
kind of.
I mean, you have put it in 5.2, but on reading that and on listening to your description, your whole description is much clearer to understand what it says in
My apologies for my writing.
No, but you explain it very well, so thank you.
I want to take that a step further. So if you want, so the provision of the legal team as a service across the council costs X, and you take a percentage of X. If, however, you as housing need specific advice from the legal department, that becomes a controllable expenditure because that's you've drawn down on that sense, as opposed to it being a general pool that is provided.
I don't think that is right. I think if it's treated as uncontrollable, it's effectively just an essential. It used to be, I think we've moved away from this. It used to be that there were internal recharges in that way. Did away with that because it wasn't really helping you, as it were. But the basic principle that those central services, not just legal, finance, HR, IT, and so on, are provided in the way that Neil described, and then kind of we draw down on their services and the total amount of resource there. It's a kind of collective responsibility of senior management in the council and the people running those services to make sure that there's the right capacity there and that it's allocated in an appropriate way in order that the total cost that's been allocated is then meeting the demand that's coming from various bits of the council. So I think it always stays under the heading of uncontrollable. The only, I think, category in which what you described might happen is if there's some specialist, so where you need to go outside the council, either because there's simply, it's a volume of work which the internal team can't manage, or more likely there's a specialist bit of legal advice or technical advice which you need, which the in-house team can't provide. Then you're spending real money in the outside market, and then that is a controllable cost that is allocated to, for example, pointed to Alton, because I know that his team's done that occasionally.
So for instance, like when we have sort of cases where we no longer have a housing duty to accommodate and we need to evict them, there's a legal cost to that, not just the time of our legal team, but the court fees and things which are controllables, but they are charged to our service because we are incurring its external expense, or specialist barrister advice sometimes is required for a specific sort of case or a specific, appeal. They are the controllables that we would. So when we do the budget review with Neil, for instance, we will look at, there's certain things such as telephony and things like that, which are uncontrollable. And we talk about pension funds.
Does controllable mean optional? That's what is it optional or it's just not?
No, so that's separate. So the controllable and uncontrollable are kind of separate from what the paper's trying to talk about, statutory and non-statutory, which is the final chart on Appendix 1.
So there are definitely things that come under the heading of controllable expenditure, which is money that we spend on discharging our statutory duties.
That's what
there's always a discussion to be had, because in almost every case, there's more than one way to discharge your statutory duty. We only need to have one library we choose to have.
That's what I wanted to
there's
find.
many ways to do your process.
How much we're actually spending. This is the statutory stuff, and how much we're spending to facilitate that. I think
Can
that's,
I give one example? So we talk about high cost temporary accommodation. So the statutory duty that we have is to provide suitable temporary accommodation. What's controllable is how, well, to some degree, because it's the market that dictates in a way what type of accommodation you can procure. But what's controllable is the 90 lets, for instance. We are making a controllable decision to move away from them because they cost a lot more. So the cost of those placements is much higher than the cost of leased accommodation. So we are moving as much as we can towards leased accommodation so that the controllable part is more controllable.
So that's a statutory example of how we can still try to kind of
Control
our budget basically.
As much as we can within what the market allows. Obviously, we always have the mercy of the markets.
I just understand where procurement sits. Is it uncontrollable or controllable?
Which part of
It's
it?
qualified. I think we need a new category, qualified, controllable.
I think the central the support provided by the central procurement team, I think, would come under the uncontrollable costs in terms of, because it's a central function on whose advice we are drawing. We do have some specialist procurement, so we have a specialist procurement, the TA procurement guy in Alston's team. There's some specialist procurement advice in Christine's team. And that's controllable because that's kind of within our management
And
structure and based on
HRA.
management. So yeah, exactly, and in the housing management team too. But the central procurement team would be in that.
Can I just say, I completely agree with the central recharge model. Because I think if you start operating recharges, you land up cutting corners, you don't get your legal advice and you don't take your HR advice. So can I say I'm thoroughly supportive of central recharge level.
It also is tap on
Justification.
Yeah.
Do any other members of the committee have Councillor North?
Thank you. I'm on page 60, and I'm looking at the HRA tenant support fund.
You might skip ahead.
Mine's-
Might skip to sorry.
Yeah.
I'm keen, I'm
Sorry,
keen.
you're-
We'll get there, I promise.
So anything on paper A5? I mean, I think overall, I think I may be repeating myself. I think this paper has been really useful to illustrate the sort of complexities of what we're actually, I think, trying to look at as a committee is to help inform our work on looking at budget proposals.
It was a helpful discipline for us to do it. And I
Yeah.
think you're absolutely right. It's one thing to say
Yeah.
we've got a duty to prevent homelessness, but actually what this shows is there are many different ways. to do
If
it.
nothing else, it sort of focused minds on those two dimensions. So I think for us as a committee, we would want to be giving feedback on the proposals themselves, and this has informed us somewhat around the landscape, I think, of what are the moving parts that we have to play with as a council, and why. But yeah.
Well, Neil's here. Do you want to talk a little more about the income column? Or, but I assume that's what you would like further information on
Yes.
in another reiteration of.
Yes,
the-
definitely. Yes, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, that's fine. We're not sure how the homelessness prevention grant is going to be met or closed into the fair funding reform. So it might be that I could do this for the spring, if that would
Okay.
work. So that we've well bedded down the fair funding review and know what the income streams from governments are. And then I can refine the commercial rent side as well.
Assuming that the stat non-stat analysis becomes a kind of fixture in the annual budget scrutiny cycle, then Neil and his colleagues supporting the other bits of the council have worked, I think, to a bit of a kind of template for how to produce these papers for different committees. But some of the suggestions you've been making about things you'd like to see in future years, I think, could be applied across the board, couldn't they, to the template as a whole, and perhaps and that could be kind of agreed with Councillor Wheel in due course.
Further question the other way around. Having looked at this division in black and white, has it made you go, actually, we might revisit this, we might
No, you know what?
look at some of the non-statutories?
The biggest penny that dropped for me, I think, in looking at this was that if we boiled our service, particularly homelessness is I think the strongest example of this. If you boiled the service down to your statutory responsibilities, it would cost you, because you would be doing the minimum at every stage up to the point where you had no choice, which is the most expensive point when you're obliged to accommodate. It's the worst outcome for the household and it's the most expensive outcome, but it's probably, in a narrow sense, you sticking to the letter of your statutory responsibility. And one of the reasons why the Homelessness Reduction Act has been helpful is that it's introduced this idea of there being a duty to prevent, which has forced all local authorities, not just us, to be thinking much more upstream, better outcomes for the household, cheaper for the council, and just the right way to do things. And as it happens, lined up with what is also the best approach in children's and adults and so on, which means we can cooperate more with those departments as well.
I think though, also just to add to that, what has come up is, for example, you'll see on appendix 1 right at the bottom, the only kind of two non-statutory, two of the three more statutory funds we do, supporting people, housing, employment, and workers. We talked about supporting people, housing, employment, and workers. Again, it's upstream, incredibly important. Someone needs a job in order to pay their rent and to contribute to society. But is this repeated in many other departments across the council? And so this kind of overview definitely helps that. And this is repeated quite a lot, but probably for different cohorts of people. So that's what we need to look at. And so that has been very interesting.
I would also like to just remark that where you have, looking at Appendix 1, as you mentioned it, on page 45, where we have, for instance, housing investigations, where that's non-statutory. The definition of statutory and non-statutory, presumably that's been worked out here, is direct, specific to legislation. Whereas I think there are some things that kind of become statutory by implication based on other legislation. And I'm thinking of the Localism Act.
Yes, I was curious when you mentioned that in the community section, and I was thinking of where legally we stand. I mean, I thought your first definition would be more appropriate, but I'm not a statutory expert on
Well,
it.
I think on that point, councillor, I'd be hesitant to
Yes.
speculate. I think we need a legal colleague to
Yeah,
help us.
we can
with that.
come back to you.
But specifically on the housing investigations,
I use that as an example.
yeah, but
Because you could do without it, but if you did do without it, you might not be delivering best value, which you
Oh, no,
might
it's
be.
essential. It's absolutely essential.
and you'd be indulging
Yeah.
criminality
Yeah.
and unfairness.
No one wants that.
Which is non-statutory,
Yeah.
which is not, which is, yeah.
Which is
Let's do
illegal.
what I think we're doing.
Yeah.
So this, albeit this is very a complex and detailed piece of work, the statutory that we're talking about here is specific statutes and acts and legislation that we can point
bind on
to
us,
specifically pertaining to that particular thing, rather than the indirect.
Yeah, so it's not in housing, for instance, is
Yeah.
the Homeless Reduction
Yeah.
Act, which is the statutory provision, and the Housing Act, that is
Landlord
statutory, it says in
and Tenants
statute that
Act,
we have to, we exist as a service because of that piece of legislation. And all the things that are built around it, it's all the padding, if you like, is to kind of protect the impact on the statutory kind of provision, because if you didn't have those steps that Dan mentioned, then all you end up with is a huge number of people in recommendation, which is not the right outcome for the residents, and it's not the right outcome for the council.
Thank you. Do any councillors in the room have any comments or questions?
Yes, please. So we're going back to the housing strategy and policy line. I mean, that's a very big expenditure, 380,000. Is that an instance where it might be a statutory obligation, but we're slightly gold plating? What page you on? On Appendix 1, page 45, housing strategy and policy. Statutory.
Sorry, yes, that's it. Up or down.
So that includes a service that is not, it consists of 2 policy officers, but also our relationship with our registered providers, and also our service improvement in housing needs as well. So it's maybe our labeling is not as clear as it needs to be, because it's not just specifically just on.
And all of those elements are statutory.
That's a good question.
So the RP related, so to have a policy, there is a statutory provision, you need to related policy. But all the other elements are non-statutory for that.
So that should maybe have a both. That should maybe.
So I think we just need to describe it better. I think I think.
And possibly split it up, but this is, it's not really.
Yeah, so these headings are
just.
are the management headings of the budget.
It's the cost code headings, yeah.
And my other question was around supporting people and housing, employment and work placements, both of which are non-statutory and quite significant amounts. And I wasn't sure that I could see, and it could be to do with a slightly different description, any savings against these 2 fairly significant, going back to the first paper, was trying to tie in the statutory and non-statutory with savings.
So support, so
Is that
you're right.
supported housing? Was
Yes,
that
it
the
is.
same
It is.
thing?
Sorry, it's 2 different, slightly different headings used to describe the same thing. So that 500,000 saving in year 4 that's shown in the savings table is against what is described in the non-stat table as supporting people. And then the housing employment works is going back to what Councillor McVeigh said. There's actually been a large bit of work which Moira was involved in leading.
Sorry, I'm making everyone twist around.
No, this is important, where we realised that there was a lot of different bits of the council doing work, and so there has been a saving at corporate level overall on the number on the amount of people paid to do employment support work. Actually, that's involved a kind of consolidation into our team, but some deletion of posts elsewhere in the council. So there have been savings overall the amount we're spending on employment support. But to go back to the point we were making just now, the case that we would make is that spending in these areas is preventative and preventing worse outcomes and higher costs down the line. But I do accept, particularly in the case of supporting people, because it's such a large number, that there's a real responsibility on us to show that that is the case, if you see what I mean, not just to kind of state that it's the
I think
case.
that was the point
Yeah.
I would have made, that is such a large budget, it is all non-statutory, that the obligation to show the sort of cost benefit of it.
Yeah.
Or to demonstrate it.
And we've, as it were, set that challenge for ourselves.
So Chair, can we come back and provide an answer on that? Because again, I think Councillor Will mentioned something in her first question about gold plating, and I think that's really important to look at it. You know, when you talked about the policy aspect, this housing strategy and policy, as Dan has explained, we need that part of it statutory, but what part is above and beyond that we don't need? And likewise, for any of these big numbers, I think we owe it to come back to you with a proper
Well, I
breakdown
think
of
that
this.
these two particular lines on page 55, I think, you know, as a committee, we've sort of picked up those earlier. And I think there is, it's not hard and fast, because actually if we talk about gold plating, I'm not sure that we might say our supported housing is gold plated currently, even though it might be.
No,
a
I
large
think as we
spend,
was talking about that with the strategy. and
even
policy
though it
and
might be a large spend.
Yeah.
But I think you mentioned earlier that this is a sort of high level kind of report, and it may be that there are areas that the committee would like to kind of go into in a bit more detail. I think this would be the one if we picked out one thing. I don't know what the rest of the committee feel, but I think more detail on that, and like you say, to be able to make the argument of what value we're getting from that spend.
If I can just point out, we're doing the zero-based budgeting exercise on supporting
Yeah.
people anyway, so in a sense, we're tackling it in a different way.
Yeah.
But
That's true.
Can I ask whether it's worth this paper, and indeed I will ask the same question next Wednesday, whether these should be shared with the leadership team so that actually there's this exposure across sort of statutory, non-statutories at a leadership level, so that everybody can look at each other's portfolios as much as they can.
It's a very good
That's
suggestion.
a very good suggestion. Shall we make that as a recommendation?
Happy to-
I think that makes a little sense, because the people who are making decisions ultimately around moving forward and agreeing savings in road areas are the leadership team. And having had this paper, I think we hear that we have sort of drawn attention to an aspect of things which has been beneficial to the teams. But if the leadership are not appraised of that across the board and across directorates, I think there's some value if they can be. So are we agreed to make that as a recommendation? Yeah, agreed. Thank you. So I think we've therefore come to the end of the joint paper A4 and A5. Thank you all very much. I think oh, Christine, I'm so sorry. Before you go,
I have one question on A6 for you.
oh, one question on A6.
okay, great.
So we are. Yes, I'll skip first. We're moving to A6 now, which is the housing revenue account budget. This report is provided at the request of the Housing and Community Select Committee to provide an overview of the council's housing revenue account budget setting and business plan. Councillor Scotland today will present the report alongside Dan Hawthorne and Tony.
Thank you. Now, hopefully this report should be quite familiar to you because we only had it relatively recently in the last committee meeting, didn't we, which the minutes have just gone through. So that was in September, thank you. And we have taken on board all your comments from it, and I hope that you will find it clearer, a lot more figures. And I'd also like to thank Neil and Natalie. I don't know if you've met Natalie yet. I think she might be
Not
new
yet.
to the
Well,
committee.
hello.
And you don't the name. Gosh. Okay, that's fine.
Natalie is the author of the paper,
Yeah.
deserves the credit.
So Natalie's really pulled all this together.
And just to say, we wouldn't normally have the Director of Housing Management here, but I'm sorry that OJ's had a family brief, so these projects.
Thank you.
Oh, and this is when the paper which I handed round comes in, just in a bit more detail, because actually the appendix back here does show our capital programme. And I had wanted to put some costs by it, but we thought we couldn't quite get the costs yet because some of them haven't been resolved yet and are subject to contracts.
Can I suggest that we do the question for Christine first? Because I don't think we probably weren't expecting that she would have any questions on this side, so I think we're all intrigued to see what it is, but then we might let her go afterwards. if that's all
It's
right.
the new homes delivery, page 65. In 13.2, I'll talk about the delivery of switches or options and delivery of 11 homes. Earlier in the year, we were in front of this committee and they were putting in £1 million development per property. I don't think we've had an update since then, and I think you were going to bring it back to the committee. And
On
I'm
the agenda for January.
it's on the agenda for January. Okay. So I was going to ask whether they were in excess of £1 million each, or where they were landing up financially.
It's approximately at the level that we advised in probably
1.2.
it hasn't gone up.
It hasn't been that.
It's gone down marginally because we won an adjudication, but not significantly. And it's not finalised, so we're only just in the process now of handing those properties over to housing. That's been slightly delayed because of the cyber issue. So the final bills, if you like, we haven't got that yet. So at the point at which we'll be coming here in January, and it's a bit of a lessons learned with the questions that you asked last time round, which are really good questions. We're not finished all of the programme yet, but what we have done with each one, and they've all been unique, is build in the lessons and learn as we've gone along. So the last one, which is Balby, which is on site at the moment, a lot of the learning from the things that didn't go well or were too complex from some of the site issues that we had in Manchester. That's partly one of the reasons we built those lessons learned in. But I think the Silchester one is it's always going to be difficult to justify spending that much per unit. And the question you asked last time is, would you do the same again if you knew that at the start? I mean, they are very lovely, but they were very, very expensive. It's a very, very complicated site, and there were a lot of issues.
There's no economy of scale at all. So
Not at all.
You have
It's
a
a
lot of
small
scale. I mean,
area.
there's a tiny triangular patch, heavily contaminated,
I mean, we
right
knew at the
close to
start,
TfL.
we did know at the start it was a very difficult site.
I
And we
think
are constrained to some extent in this borough, more often than not, to be using difficult sites.
I think when the decision was made to use that site to progress, this was pre-Russian invasion, extremely costly building materials, extremely high interest rates. So unfortunately, that did compound. I think the original
And of course-
decision was
and
not
of course
quite
Brexit.
so
Impact upon the workforce availability and support.
well, the decision was made after Brexit.
Yeah, I mean, we'll be able to cover all of this in the January report in a lot more detail. But the only thing I'll say about it now is that we won't have everything because we're not done yet. But I think you'll get a reasonably interesting picture of kind of how it came about, decisions that were made. Not desperation is probably the wrong word, but we are exactly as Councillor Simmons said. We've got a small number of sites that we can develop ourselves in this borough. And so the sites that were chosen, there was some complexity with almost everything that we did and the way that we went about it. added some complexity to. We did have, for a good reason, on each development, 3 rounds of consultation to make sure that we got it right. The standards were gold plated, they needed to be at that time, and that increased the costs from whatever you might originally think it would cost, and whatever a developer, and you mentioned earlier, Councillor Simmons, about the standards of new homes. That issue was something that we were trying to address with focusing on quality here, but that didn't come at a price. January.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I shall now turn to the committee and ask if anyone has any questions on this paper for our officers and movement. Yes.
Question, thank you very much for the paper. I had a question for Neil. So on page 55, 8.7, it says for every 0.5 million, so 500,000 base revenue savings identified, additional capacity of 10.5 million is generated. Does that mean how much it costs to service the borrowing?
Yeah.
It does. Okay, so therefore, going on to page 62, it just worries me. I mean, because at some point, presumably you have to pay the money back. 11.3, there is a call on borrowing of 375 million over the next 5 years. Okay, how much will it cost for us to service that borrowing? I reckon it's about 18 million. Is that right? How much is it going to cost us to service that level of borrowing? And how are we ever going to pay it back at the end of the day?
I'll kick off and I'll ask Natalie to get the arithmetic. So we've assumed a long-term debt of just over 4% for new borrowing. So effectively, if you multiply that by 375, you get to it's just a touch less than 18.
Okay, but as a rough,
as a rough figure,
yeah.
it's ballpark about right.
Okay.
The way HRA business plans are developed, there is no obligation to repay the debt. So it sits in the business plan, and the cost kind of depreciates over time as inflation goes up. The cost of borrowing remains fixed, so it gets eroded that way. But the debt sits on the council's balance sheet.
So the debt is to central government, am I right? The money's coming from. Where's the money coming from?
Most of the borrowing will be from the government through the
Yeah.
Public Works Loans Board. There'll be a little bit from the GLA perhaps for special initiatives like energy efficiency, but the vast bulk will be the government, and we get a discount for HRA borrowing compared to general fund borrowing costs.
And we don't have to pay it back.
No.
But it will cost us over the 5 years about 18 million pounds.
Yes, you pay the interest, but you don't pay down the principal.
Yeah, exactly that.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Quite a lot, but it is quite a lot. I'm looking at table 3 savings summary.
Sorry, Catherine, what table?
So
On the same page,
Right,
page
so-
62.
So, I don't know how you've arrived at that, and so breakdown would be quite useful. And have you done any testing as to whether the savings are going to be realised? You've just got service delivery savings proposed, but I don't know how you've arrived at it.
So I think I might say, if I've got this wrong, but this is another one in the category that we were describing earlier, i.e. that we've set ourselves the challenge of finding these savings under these headings in each of these years. That doesn't mean that we've identified, that we've got a kind of itemised list for each year of what will form those savings. So we recognise that we need to be able to make these savings in order to come up with an overall balanced business plan. But of course, the important thing to say is that and it says it here,
it's based on a kind of informed view, an informed judgment, based partly on the kind of management experience of the team managing the service, that we can achieve those savings. But the other really critical point is that a large amount of the revenue expenditure that we currently incur in the HRA is workforce and other expenditure that comes about because of the poor quality of our stock. And so as you invest capital in improving the quality of the stock, you can reduce the amount of money you're spending on both labour and materials in day-to-day running repairs that we're currently having to spend, because we are dealing with a kind of a low class stock. So some of this is a natural tailing off of revenue spend that you would expect to see as you improve the capital investment in your stock. And it's part, therefore, of the pattern that we're trying to re-establish, having inherited this poor quality and therefore revenue intensive stock from the TMO when we took it back over. Is that fair?
Yes, and just to add to that, sort of service delivery rate, 500 of that is an estimate of saving as a result of delivering the capital works. So the more capital works we deliver, hopefully there'll be less reactive repairs as a result of that.
I mean, the only problem I have is we don't quite know what the market's going to look like. There's all these variables. Well, that's the reason why I said, have you attempted some testing as to whether something?
So there are some, I couldn't point you to the paragraph, maybe not can help. There are some assumptions that underpin in terms of kind of some of the fundamental elements that we are, because you're absolutely right, things like interest rates and so on, we just have to make some educated assumptions about where some of those things will be and create a fix in order to set those things. And I think we all accept that we're almost certain not to get those assumptions all completely right, certainly over that 30-year life. But that they are kind of educated estimates, and that we will continue to update those assumptions every year in order to make sure that we're making the best possible assessment. Where is that
page
table?
67 and table 5 is the summary of key assumptions. We've got more assumptions behind all the workings, but that's the summary of the key assumptions that they've done.
Because one of the areas, if we get back to the temporary accommodation, it's a difficult market to manage. You might have a property in the case of and you might have more costs associated with managing it because of lifestyle and different things. And we don't quite know how benefits or funding is going to come through for it. I mean, I think that's the vulnerability. And that's why I'm saying, have you tested it in any way?
I don't think we've got any evidence that, as it were, lifestyle factors are any different from temporary accommodation. I mean, but important to remember, this is the HRA, so this is not for the most part temporary accommodation we're talking about here. This is stuff that we own and manage and therefore have a high degree of control and stuff. The rental income is, which of course is paid by a large number of residents through benefits, is we make assumptions about that. We do make assumptions about, I think I'm right in saying we probably make an assumption about the proportion of the rent roll that we will collect that's not 100%, because inevitably there's kind of bad debt inevitably for any social landlord. But and were there any kind of big, so certainly at the time that some of the changes came in, I think it was the universal credit changes, which meant that rent wasn't paid directly to landlords. Landlords had to then readjust those assumptions because there was a higher risk of rent not getting paid, which we're past that point now, so we're in a steady position. That's a good example of the kind of horizon scanning that we need to do in order to be able to test that our assumptions are keeping track with the way the landscape is changing.
Chair, if I may just come here, because I think Councillor Wade, your initial question was right to make a focus on this table 3 and to actually challenge us to put in more detail on that. And I think that is something that we need to do, because when I think of all the decisions we've made over the years, like for example, selling off street properties, not only will that bring in revenue and then replacing them on an estate, but that will also help in terms of they're very costly to maintain. So it's putting together all these different aspects And again, in our repairs team, we've now, well, once the cyber incident is over, we've got a, fully reporting repair tool. So will that cut down on complicated telephone conversations? We need to kind of probably actually start putting some numbers or estimated numbers by these kind of ballpark figures. So I think that's the next step. I don't know, Dan, how feasible that is to bring that back, or is that still going to be?
Well, we could probably, I'm not sure about where it would fit in terms of the scope of these committees, but you probably just nail it down for next year.
So we do have a breakdown of those numbers that we can share, so that's fine. I mean, just comparing to the digital channels, 5,000, that is digital means, so efficiencies through those sort of channels. So we can provide that breakdown.
I guess the other thing we're saying is that some of the measures that we're taking to find savings at the kind of corporate level, the general fund, naturally helping it. So the voluntary redundancy scheme, for example, was open to staff paid from the HRA. So some of the staffing savings we need to make have naturally been achieved through that. Some of the things that we're doing in the kind of digital sphere and so on will benefit the HRA as well. So it will kind of ride on the coattails of some of the corporate revenue savings as well.
But again, if we're looking at the HRA, as we always do in isolation, to have some of those in here, for example, staff savings, how much should we save through voluntary redundancy, how much we may have to save through non-voluntary redundancies.
Sounds like we've got some.
Yes,
Okay. I mean, I think for us as a committee, to be able to be of assistance to you, it would be very helpful if we could have that further detail on that table 3. And if you already have it, it doesn't necessarily need to come to committee or wait for that. It could be circulated perhaps to us, and we can offer our feedback that way. That would be great. Thank you. Esther Gardner.
I wanted to pick up on Councillor Rossi's question about the interest, because when I read or I look at the chart on page 75, I just see that the interest has grown. So by year 5, we're at 26 million. Very more than and then I also look at the chart on page 71, and yet you haven't got your major works that you need to do for your decent home standards and post the review of the. Sorry, shall I go through this page again? 75 and 71. Review was benefit. But I just look at them and I go, we are actually saying we haven't factored in the cost of the works we're going to have to do. A, because you probably don't know them as a result of the decent homes, as a result of the stock survey condition. And yet we are clearly making some expectations, or are those expectations in 75 actually based on the lack of information? And then I find 71 kind of useless, given that it doesn't include it's got the massive caveat at the beginning, which is the full capital investment required for our stock is not currently built in, therefore we're worse in the position. I don't really understand what's the worth of that chart at the moment, if it's going to forecast so far in advance. And the reality is actually it isn't actually?
Yeah, I did challenge this chart. So why?
So we have built in the current known figures that we have as an estimate for doing decency by 2030, but until we have the stock condition data back, we're not fully in a position to commit to those figures yet until we have that information back, which is why it's caveated. So this is our best guess with the information we currently have available on what the investment requirement is, and when we have that data back, we'll obviously be able to feed that into the business plan and give us a full accurate picture of what the challenge is.
So I think it would have been helpful to have said that. There's provisional figures have been included, but they're not certain. So that actually I looked at this and thinking they weren't included at all.
So perhaps this has just been written in an overcautious way, that actually there are estimates included.
Yes.
But until we have the final the numbers, it's got to be an estimate. So yes, it's not just that they're not included at all.
Thank you. And then on page 2 questions. Page 75, 75. Could you explain what special services are?
I knew this would come up. Natalie sent a very, very good description of them. Thank you, Natalie. What did you say?
Special services, that was the question, wasn't it?
I wasn't set up.
So special services are
No, you weren't, because I was asking the same myself.
relate to costs that affect only specific groups of tenants. So for example, concierge services, caretaking, things like that doesn't affect all tenants, and its costs incurred for specific groups.
So you can only recharge the service charges for those properties where they are, you know. That's
Thank you. And then one last quick question. Page 74, that will be added to the charges for other users. And I was scratching my head saying I didn't know we charge that and what's the basis on which we can charge that and why do we?
This is judging back. Sorry.
So this is to non-housing management prices for example, garages and car park bays.
Tenants and tenants and leaseholders, and then non-tenants and non-leaseholders charged.
Yes, but why do we add that one not to the other? Why do we add that to?
We're obliged to, is the
Obliged.
short answer. Because there's a market for parking and garages, where that's open across the piece for level playing field purposes, we're obliged to charge VAT. But for tenants and leaseholders, because it's part of their lease or tenancy agreement, it's part of providing the accommodation. So it's the accommodation then that drives the no VAT.
And is that specific to parking or any service we offered?
It's any, the principle is for any service. So where
I suppose
Got
potentially
it.
under baseline, if we were offering out offices or something, if we had any communal space. I don't
Oh,
know, but
no,
that's-
accommodation is different because you can opt to tax accommodation or not, commercial property. But,
taxi.
So
Commercial
for
property.
with service charges generally.
Yeah.
Let's say maintenance of common parts.
Yeah.
Which you recharge
Yeah.
to the tenants and leaseholders.
Yeah.
You're not charging VAT on that because it's part of the
part of the requirement.
However, if there was, say, another block somewhere that owned its freehold and that wanted the council to be maintaining its common parts lighting, we might charge VAT to them.
Yes, we would.
Councillor Wade, anything?
Right, just for clarification, when you say charges for tenants, is that £17.97 per year, or is it per month or per week? I can see that it starts on the 1st of April, but I can't actually see whether that is an annual fee, a monthly fee, a weekly.
Noted.
Weekly.
Add clarity.
Sorry?
Noted, we'll add clarity, so it's per year.
So what is it,
It's
the weekly?
weekly. It's weekly. We can all make a note of that.
That's quite a lot.
It is.
Agree.
Slightly the same.
Okay, Chair. Page 59, you mentioned a table, the hunting fees. And page 61, paragraph 9.31, you mentioned you support vulnerable residents. And 9.32, you said you can support tenant support. And you mentioned that tenant is low income covering their health, either housing benefit or universal credit. But low wage people, and universal credit doesn't cover all the rent. For this tenant support fund, who is eligible? Because last year we have a client who cannot afford to pay the rent, and he was told he's not eligible for tenant support fund, even though a counselor advised me. So who is eligible? And these people who cannot, their rent are not covered. Okay, how can you support?
Thank you. Very good question. all our tenants, if the landlord is RBKC, they can apply to us. And we have a very good benefits and income team led under Bernadette and Aggie, who really do very targeted work with people. But if your tenant is if your person you're talking about is not one of our tenants, then this fund wouldn't support them.
Is one of your tenants.
Okay, well then let's take that up later.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that later.
And you advise me I can apply for.
Let's not get into an individual case
Yeah,
here, but I'm really happy to take that up.
No,
with
but
you later.
what I mean is that there is other tenants have same problems. So I would like to know who is eligible for tenant support fund.
Well, I'm sure the tenancy team, the income and benefits team, will assess the level of income that person does or doesn't have, and will support accordingly. It can't just be we'll pay all your rent the next year. It will be according to need.
Sure, we can.
I think it
If the
would-
committee wants to see some more detail
Yes,
on how
I think it would
eligibility
be
is
helpful for us
assessed.
to see the
Sure.
eligibility criteria.
Yes.
So I
If that
suspect we
is
don't have that
circulated.
detail at our fingertips
No,
here, if
that's
that's all right,
fine.
but we can.
We could circulate that to the
Yeah.
committee. I think it would be helpful. Thank you. Councillor Moore?
So that's rather pulled the rug from under what I was going to ask about, but we'll carry on with that if I may. Many of my colleagues here will have heard me talk on Thursday. I am going in front of the Camden Senior Citizens Lunch Club. And this always comes up on there because there are a lot of people that have been worried for a long time about the cost of living, as many people have. And many have been recognised that this council has done very well in the past at supporting them. And now here comes the rub. A lot of people are worried, and with elderly people, they sometimes don't scrutinise things as much as other people might do. And a lot of them are actually scared at what is coming up because they've seen the comms coming up. So I know that I'm going to get a lot of questions on this on Thursday. So my question is about the take-up has been so far, and what is the expected increase in take-up with the thoughts, how budgets are going to go ahead?
So we think the increase in take-up might be a bit less. I mean, the increase the take-up has been to almost full amount last year. And remember, we also have to fill in the gap from the government for the winter fuel payments. So we paid out to our elderly residents who just missed out on getting the winter fuel payments. We paid out to our tenants money from this fund, and it was very well received. And then also we worked really, really closely with some of those elderly people who actually should have applied for pension credit. And so we've actually now got more people onto the pension credit. I mean, the winter fuel payment is now back on the cards, so that should reassure your residents, your elderly residents you're meeting there, if they're worried about that. We can definitely get you more detail. We've got a new officer starting, and we do a thing that goes around all the borough called Money Matters Cafes. And it's a one-on-one individual help with making sure that you're accessing any grants or any help or any other aspects of employment and education and income as well.
It's also worth saying, Councillor, I think I interpreted the thrust of your question correctly, that in the context of the kind of wider budget challenges the council faces, which I think is what's leading to some of the comments which might have alarmed some of the residents, it's a really important principle that although we recognise we have to make savings, that we respect the principle that we minimise the extent to which the impact of those savings falls on those most important. So that the principle of protecting the most vulnerable and a social housing tenant who is struggling to pay their rent would very much fall in that category. I think we would want to be aware if it looked like there was a risk that some of the changes that the council's making, and of course that there'll be more of the changes to come over the coming years as the full impact of the funding reform bites. But we would be very keen to understand if it looked like there was being an impact at that level, because it's exactly those kind of residents that we're trying to protect. And it would be, if that is happening, it shouldn't just fall on the tenancy support fund to provide that safety net. I think we should be looking at other mechanisms whereby the council could target its support for residents in such a way that people in that situation won't. Because there are they should be disproportionately unaffected, if you see what I mean.
Well, that's reassuring. There are some people that are kind of on the buffer. They're not necessarily covered by the benefit system, and they're in. I've referred to them as just about managers, and I know it.
Yeah.
Where they're worried about. They don't want to. There was one lady. actually in Earl's Court. She's 94 years of age. I don't want to rely on benefits, but I'm really worried what's coming down the line. And that there are going to be some people that are going to either have to fall onto the benefits or seek help in other ways. But thank you for that. But can I have one follow-up question on another subject close to my heart, which is on page 64, where you mentioned about the carbon neutral strategy. And again, this is something that interests a lot of people. And the question I've been getting is, are the budget restrictions going to change this policy in any way, or are we still on track to meet our target?
Good question. The first bullet point at the end says where financially feasible to do so. So we are looking at all of these measures through a kind of finance lens, as well as an environmental lens in terms of our commitments. Some like LED lights, you know, that's a kind of a no-brainer when the lights are running out to replace those. And I think we put in the double glazed or triple glazed windows. That's a personal favourite of mine, because I feel that is absolutely essential to do that in all of our housing stock. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to kind of go and put expensive cladding in as well, just even changing some of those windows. So I've made that a priority in the major works to get to some of the carbon neutral commitments we've made. But I'm afraid, yes, we are having to look at everything through the finance lens.
So could one of the options there be that if we were saying that we want to be carbon neutral, we're just a few points short of that, because the cost of getting those last few bits might be excessive? Is that something that we'd really consider? I mean, a lot of the, as Councillor McVeigh just said, there's a block not far from this town hall that is so looking forward to next year having their double glazing.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful, handsome building. I'm surprised it's not a listed building actually, but it does need it very much.
And I think where there's a case from a kind of a fuel poverty or a kind of thermal comfort argument that the improvement needs to be made, that would be prioritised over perhaps a measure which is driving carbon savings, but which is perhaps not as directly affecting the quality of life in the home. If that makes sense. I think it's also worth bearing in mind that there's no question that the financial environment makes the timing of the target we've set ourselves harder. And the principle of the commitment remains. And the other important thing to say is that the government recently consulted on the kind of next iteration of the Decent Home Standard, which the version of that they consulted on includes higher standards of carbon performance in homes. Mm-hmm. So there'll be a kind of statutory regulatory angle for this, which there isn't at the moment. Okay. That still is several years away, but it's, given that we're making a long-term plan here, we need to anticipate and be scanning that horizon, because eventually I think the kind of regulatory requirement will catch up with us. But we're not sitting here pretending that this is straightforward, and I think it probably is right to say that there will be some difficult decisions ahead where we'll be weighing the priority of this against some other things, and there will be some occasions probably where issues of kind of resident well-being or safety have to take precedent. I think kind of it's we said we weren't prepared for that.
Yeah, and just jumping in here, what Dan alluded to about the decent homes and EPC certificate standards. There's somewhere in this paper, I can't now find it, I remember reading it earlier, or rather making sure it was put in about saying that if we cannot get some of our homes up to the required certificate standard, we do have to look at options for selling.
Can I come in on those points, please? I could see on page 65, before I go to 12.9, I want to make sure that as a committee, we are all extremely clear that what we're looking at here is the housing revenue account, which is ring fenced. So it's not relevant to the fairer funding formula, which you have mentioned in the comms. I don't know whether that's completely still clear to everybody on this committee. What I'm hearing from Councillor North is that the comms around the fairer funding and the savings that need to be made have been very stark and alarmist, and have landed that way for some vulnerable people, which is not to do with specifically housing, but it is perhaps something that the council as a whole could take away. We are here talking about the housing revenue account only. And when we talk about delivering carbon neutrality, we now turn to page 65 and we can see at 12.9 that there is a thing called the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund. So that's not going to be at risk from the fairer funding formula. The risks that we have here is the ongoing gap in the housing revenue account based upon the fact that rents and income are outstripped by the cost of restoring and maintaining the properties that we have. Is that fair to say?
That's very well put, Chair. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. So where residents are alarmed, that's where their alarm should be. So let's be very clear about that.
So-
Now, we have talked about the borrowing. Yes, sorry.
Well, I was just
carry
going to
on.
say, I didn't go back to some points, so I'm not trying to reheat what we just talked about, but you're absolutely right that the HRA is not directly affected by the fairer funding changes. But I think to Councillor North's point, the total amount of support that is provided by the public sector to vulnerable residents is, and to the extent therefore that intersects with the HRA business plan when it comes to the tenancy support fund, I think it is reasonable, as it were, to look at the way that residents might be approaching it through that lens. But you're absolutely right that the changes to the fairer funding formula will neither help nor hinder our ability to balance the HRA business plan on the whole. Because it's self-contained. There are a whole range of macro factors that are hitting us hard, but the fairer funding formula is not primarily on them.
No, the point I was making from the concerns that have been raised is that we around this table think about individual budgets. But if you're a 70-year-old woman and you're not on benefits and you're thinking the council tax is going up, my parking permit is going up, this is going up, I'm a leaseholder and this is going up. All these things are a combination, whereas we understand it's separate budgets and some budgets are ring fenced and some are not. It's an overall cost of living, and those that are just about managing are really struggling. And their prediction for the coming year, because their council tax might go up by 5%, other taxes might go up. It's for some people it's quite crushing.
It's right.
And it is important, I think, to note the cumulative impact of these increases. So
Yeah. Yeah, it's year on year, absolutely,
yes.
yeah, because the inflation target's 2%, and we're looking at council tax at 5% each year.
So when we are talking about council tax and rent and service charge and parking, and other things as well, it does begin to add up.
Yeah.
So that's why I will be saying when the rest of the committee have asked their questions, how important it is to be mindful of the impact of rent increases on residents. Did you have a question? Did I see you?
I wanted to, I agree with Lloyd that it's hitting these people just above the benefit level. And so it's going to be hard to see how we'll be able to support them. Because in a way, part of it is prevention of people becoming homeless, or it's actually just their physical well-being, because they've really been quite freaked out by the advertising.
Yeah, I think the advertising has been very alarmist, we might say, especially given that we've got unknowns at this point. So
well, it is quite alarming.
Well, it is, yes, absolutely.
It's been cut.
We've got months to go.
We're talking about residents here, the members of the public, and what I'm saying is that messaging has been perhaps alarming in a way more so than it needed to be, given the vulnerability of some of our residents.
My worry is that those that are not alarmed that are going to get hit. That's my worry, and it's going to be months down the line. I mean, I'm quite pleased when people are aware of it, but when people are not aware of it, that's more alarming to be not alarmed by the worry.
So I think the point that both of you are making, Sof has talked about the tenant support fund being very targeted. And I think there is a piece there that perhaps you could take away, which is when we are targeting what we consider as the most vulnerable, it's not necessarily only going to be people who are on benefits.
Oh no,
So,
completely.
or indeed people who are on pension credits.
Yeah.
For instance, if there's somebody who is not receiving pension credits, but they're on the full state pension and that's it, then they don't get those that sort of gateway support that people on pension credits do get. So I think there is a whole group of people that Lloyd is talking about who potentially may fall through the cracks of what support might be out there. And I think probably we as a committee are all agreed that we would want the officers and league members to be extremely mindful of that.
Absolutely. And just to bear in mind, though, we are only talking about us as a landlord with our tenants, that is 7,000 households.
Yes.
Versus the entire borough, which is impacted by the fair funding. So Stan rightly said.
Thank you.
Have you ever done any research into how many people were eligible for pension credit and haven't actually taken it up?
I'm sure the team has all that and can get back to you.
Yes.
Can I just say, I also work onto this one, thank you. I just had a few questions, and it is just so that we could provide a little clarity. And we often have a lot of sort of
Sorry,
charge.
I've given away all the copies. Do you have a spare one? Or
So this is the Housing Management Procurement Decision Reports Pipeline.
So you were talking earlier about procurement costs. This comes from Housing Management Procurement Team. And they produce this, and there's also actually a column with a figure in which we've taken out. But basically, just so you know, it more or less comes up to almost kind of £200 million. And as you can see, some of them are key decisions for the league member to make, and some are executive decisions for the executive director to make, depending on the level. And so as you can see, I think I just wanted to kind of share with you the amount of work that's going on all over the borough, I suppose, and in a way that's already in the paper in one of the appendix that Natalie put together. Thank you. But just there's a little bit more detail, so you can see what is kind of, you know, lot 8, what is tranche 2. I find it quite fascinating. You might want to kind of just see, share the amount of, it's just an indication, because we're talking about budgets, we're talking about costs, and it's not just being paid on staff sitting in the office and doing anything. This is what they are managing every single day, and this is what contributes to all the costs of when we have to do the borrowing.
Yeah, but also this is what's driving the repairs costs down at the
Exactly.
So what we've got is, in the 5th column, we've got a choice whether it's works or consultancy service. And what this is procurement, right? Some of them we've got services. This is procurement of these works. Some of which will be sort of major works and repairs kind of thing.
Yeah, okay. Above, yeah, refurbishment. I mean, above and beyond the day-to-day
Yes.
repairs.
And then some of it will be around bringing our homes up to a decent home standard, perhaps.
Pretty much all of the major works will
Well, they would
contribute to
they would
getting it to
include that, yes, of course.
Absolutely.
But there may be buildings which didn't have a major works but still are non-decent. So that's the works that we're doing on our homes from the HRA, which is very good to see before us in the whole list like this. And I will get my magnifying glass and study it in further detail later on. Do any other members of the committee have any questions?
I just wondered
No?
if,
Go ahead.
for example, there's a few, my eye particularly goes to 496, 1, 2.
Roughly whereabouts are you? 3/4?
8 down, so here, which is
Tranche 2,
tranche
24.
2, not 24, 21 street properties. It's not
Yes.
very informative.
I'm glad you asked that, because I did get a breakdown of where they were, because also I want to be really mindful that the major work team is not going into do major works on street properties, which are ones which are going to be sold. So I do have a breakdown of those ones. I can't remember off the top of my head what they are, but actually those ones I think normally are all over the bar.
Now making the type quite a lot smaller still. We could we were just trying to keep it on one sheet of paper. We just reduced some other thing. And it is because it is true. Those street property contracts, you know, you're literally kind of then dotted around to 21.
I wonder what our policy was on the street properties that we want to sell. Do we do them up or just sell them as they are?
Depends on the level and depends on the market.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously we only sell them when the tenant has moved out.
But we wouldn't do kind of major capital investment. We'd bring them up to a standard that made them saleable.
Okay.
But we wouldn't
Yeah,
do really big.
We're not developers.
So to keep our minds focused, I would like to draw everybody's attention to page 48. probably should have done exactly the start of this paper, where it says the committee are asked to comment on various things, but comment on various things. And some of those we have mentioned and some of those we have not. Before I go on to that, I would quickly like to just ask about the tenant support fund, if I may. We've agreed that some detail on the eligibility for that will be shared with the committee, which will be very welcome. I'm a bit confused how within that eligibility it's included being used for winter fuel payments. I'm not quite sure. I'm not
Those are
quite sure.
elderly
yes,
tenants, but
but I'm not quite sure how that works out. I'd like to have clarity on that. And I will say something else. If you set the eligibility in such a way, you can set the eligibility in such a way to either over or underspend on that TSF. And we don't, it has been mentioned, but we don't yet have clarity on whether it is people who are below the threshold to have benefits and therefore gateways on that. So that's I think a big and important one. Following on from our comment on the suggested rent increase, because as we've mentioned, that's going to impact our residents a lot. We are also within the Landlord and Tenants Act supposed to be charging a reasonable rent for occupation of another accommodation. And I'm thinking of some accommodations in my ward where I struggle to see the reasonableness of what's being charged given the state of the property, and where we have homes that are not meeting decent standards. I feel theoretically at least there is an argument that actually maybe it's not warranted to have these rent increases on those properties. Granted, we all I think appreciate the reasons why this is the assumption in the budget. So that would be part of my comment. I also like to clarify the £2 per week.
So that's currently that the government has consulted on this idea of rent conversions, which I think we talked about last time we were here, whereby we landlords, including us, who are currently charging rents below the so-called formula rent, have the option to increase rents at a rate that is additional to the CPI +1 permitted, in order to converge with the formula rents charged by other social landlords. So the government we were kind of hoping the government would confirm the outcome of that consultation as part of the budget. They didn't. What they said instead was that they were going to confirm it in January. So at the moment, what we're saying is, if permitted by government, we are proposing to converge at the rate of £2 a week for those properties which need to converge. That's not true of all of them. But if the government were to, when we responded to the consultation, we along with the rest of London councils suggested a rate of £3 per week would actually be more appropriate, more helpful. But the government consulted on none, one or two. So what we're saying is, assuming we are permitted to converge at the rate of £2 a week, that is what we are proposing, and that's what we're seeking your comments on. If the government comes back and says either they're abandoning the principle of convergence altogether, or they're only permitting it at £1 per week, then we would just amend our recommendation to the leadership team effectively to go up to whatever limit they don't have.
And can I just make it very clear that about formula rent and conversion, we had a long discussion about it at the last meeting, and there's a very helpful description of it. It's actually in section 9, which Natalie has put in, just if you need to clarify it. But we're not talking about getting anything up to market rent, it's formula rent, which is a formula that the government comes up with, but all social housing landlords stick to it, according to the room size, according to the area, according to the location. And then, so that's completely separate from the annual rent increase according to inflation, which is the 4.8% CPI.
But if you were a person in one of those properties, it would be additional. You'd be having your 48%, 4.8% plus your £2.
Yeah.
So for some people, that's.
And again, just in terms of fairness, I think if a new tenant or a new tenancy is signed, that is already at formula rent. That's already been converged. So, this is, as Neil's nodding away, you could have someone in one flat and then a new person comes in to the flat just above or next door. and they're paying considerably more.
It's true, you're not just converging between us and other landlords, you're
No.
converging between different tenancies within our stock.
And as you saw, just on that whole sheet, the amount of work that's got to be done. We're doing a lot of it from borrowing, but also the rent feeds into that.
Thank you. So, in terms of commenting on the tenant support fund, I think it's quite difficult for us to do that more than we already have without having the extra clarity that we've requested. So it may be as a committee, we would want to come back with comments once we've seen that, if that's all right. Thank you very much. We've looked at the fees and charges and the estate parking charges. Travellers' rent increase, of course, is in line with the other tenancies, residential increases. And again, at the moment, it is what it is, which is why the tenant support fund, I think, is so important, and tenancy sustainment teams and so forth. I think we have commented on the rest. So unless there are any other questions from the committee, I'm going to turn to see if there are any councillors in the room.
Councillor Real. Surprise. Thank you, Sharon. Chair, I just wanted to say I'm slightly surprised by the paucity of information in this thing. We've got 43 million. If you look at 8-line budget, we've got 43 million pounds of expenditure in 2 lines. We've got on page 62, we've got 2 lines of savings, which don't, the headings of which don't relate back to the headings on table 1. And so it's quite hard to have a view and on the sort of operational efficiency or the operational potential for savings. And there's no mention in this paper of transformation. There's no mention of looking at, and maybe that's because you don't think this, this committee isn't supposed to be looking at, and I can't see why not though. We talk a lot in the council about transformation and particularly processes. And if there's one place where there are loads and loads of processes, it's housing. It's one process after another. And you'd have thought there was potential there. None of that potential for saving or for efficiency seems to be reflected in this paper, because every saving, I know it's a hermetically sealed account, but every saving enables either more capital investment, lower rents, or better services.
Lower borrowing.
Better services, more work on antisocial behaviour, better repair service. So that's what I don't quite understand. And I suppose what I'm saying is that it would be helpful to see this in the future.
So thank you, Councillor. We've already said earlier about that table 3 saving summary. Natalie's going to provide us more detail about that, because that's exactly what I think is missing. About we're doing all these other policies when we start seeing savings. So we probably haven't written that clearly enough. And regarding the expenditure, again, Natalie and I were discussing this, and I wanted to see the pie charts we did last year, which showed, where the costs, where the expenditure were, which was on staff, which was on other things. So we're going to bring them back, but again, we couldn't get them in time with the
It's also it's good to know that all those transformation ideas that are throughout the rest of the council, and indeed in housing in the general account, are reflected in the housing revenue account.
Yeah, and I think there's probably quite a lot of the change that's happened since 2018, which has been probably pretty transformational, which perhaps we haven't described in that way. I do think there's something about the moment that we're in just now in housing management, when you combine the fact that we're having to kind of respond to the new regulatory environment and the outcome of our inspection. And I think it's not completely relevant that we are in this period of being between housing management directors, where probably right now we're not, as it were, leaping forward into a process of change. We are just kind of consolidating a bit. And I would expect that when after Jarhead starts this time next month, and then kind of as we go into next year, we might perhaps then be lifting our head up and thinking a bit more about kind of what that future change looks like. But I think there's something about how this captures us just at a moment, actually, where that's not the principal way that we're thinking about it. It's
I suppose it would be more important in the paper that there was at least an aspiration or an acknowledgement that this has to be done
in the
future.
And I guess the final thing I would say is that, like I said before, we have benefited from
some of the kind of corporate transformational approaches like the VR exercise and so on, which have an impact in the general fund and the HRA as in the general fund. But I absolutely accept challenge that the HRA needs to be signed up to that. And they're small things, and Councillor McVeigh mentioned earlier the change we've made to kind of web-based repairs reporting.
Small, that's really quite large. So then we've got to get that.
Sorry, Councillor McVeigh. Speaking of
Yes.
repairs in the context of transformation, there has been recently a very impressive piece of work actually done by the TCC residents,
Yes.
which have made a number of recommendations around systems which will increase the efficiency and outcomes and may entail some cost savings.
Yes.
So are those being considered?
Yes, absolutely.
Because I'm not sure from this paper, I think the point that Mary's
No,
making is a
No,
good
it's
one.
fully, I completely
And I'm
agree.
not sure from this
Taken on
paper
board.
that that kind of thing is very clear from here. So I think the question around transformation and efficiencies, maybe we need more clarity on that. And it may be included in the detail that we're going to get from table 3 on page 62, that maybe there's more clarity for us there. If there is, and that is the case, it may be as a committee, once we have absorbed that information, that we may wish to come back with feedback and recommendation.
Absolutely.
Perhaps, once we have that detail to do it with, to be able to overview.
And I think again, just what Dan was saying about the kind of, there has been so many changes, I mean, you know, our policy of selling street properties, our policy of getting a proper kind of, you know, webs repair service up and running, all these other things, we haven't yet kind of probably put that in to say that this is what's kind of, you know, going to help in savings. And I know Doug used to talk a lot about AI, but as a council, we've yet to really use that properly, I think.
There will be no doubt IT developments which can improve efficiency with or without AI as such. But I think we need to be really pending those two pieces of information around the tenant support fund and around the actual where are the savings. We need the more detail on the proposals, and then we can come back.
And we'll come back and we'll just email that to you.
Yes, splendid. Yes, agreed. Yes. Before we finally wrap this one up, Councillor Ethan.
Sorry, no, I don't have an additional question, but suggestion. And increasing consultants and rent will affect every person. So I would like to suggest you look at the income generating and reduce, you know, this rent and increase, and also consultants. 5% really is very high, and the rent and will affect everybody, whether they benefit, whether they are not, whether they are working. So that's a suggestion, Chair. This is not additional question.
Thank you. Thank you. So that brings us to the end of this paper. Thank you all very much for coming. And so now we'll move on to A7, which is the civic Stone's lodge.
It's not, no, I'll be here on the 27th, just last week.
We shall look forward to that.
You haven't got rid of me yet. No.
And to giving you a good send-off. So we're looking at page 79, and this report sets out the development of the Select Committee's work programme, identifying the priorities for the municipal year 2025-2026. Now, I have a little note on this paper, which is to say the homelessness and rough sleeping strategy has been removed from January's meeting due to timeline changes, but it will come to the committee in the new municipal year.
So after
Yes.
elections.
Yes.
Okay.
Following the overview of scrutiny committee on the 20th of November, a report to the Housing Community Select Committee on housing complaints was requested. You remember? Well, I remember. Who remembers? And this report will now be coming to the Select Committee in March. And we have also the Chair and Vice Chair requested a report on the proposed voluntary sector support fund changes, which we discussed tonight as well. So, does anybody have any thoughts or comments on this? Please, Pat.
I have
Yes,
a question
please
to
go.
Joanna. You're going to do a deep dive into consultation. Where are we on that? Because I think partly what people have been saying today, not understanding things or getting the wrong messages from Congress. I think it's really important that we look at it.
So we took it away. I did a lot of work trying to scope it out. And so we weren't able to do the, because of where the Charter of Public Participation was, and in the whole timetable, we had to reduce the scope of it massively, because it wasn't going to work in terms of they want time to embed that. I confess that it is with me, and I've just been rather snowed under with the casino application by ward. So my apologies on that. But it is meant to be looking at how we can better reach or the comms package. So I will talk to Bella and the members of the group to actually see whether we can do some sort of quick. We had been looking at a day's review for it, and whether it actually works on a comms piece. I don't know.
We were going to do scrutiny in a day, like a spotlight session.
Yes.
And that's where we're up to with it, isn't it?
Yeah, and whether we can do that in something like January, early February. The idea is to report for the March meeting.
Okay.
Can I just ask about hostels?
Yes.
Yes, it is in the action plan that there's a question mark over about a meeting and a follow-up. So MT, I was wondering if you have any.
No, well, I've been, I mean, I really don't know why. I was going to be included in discussions or whatever on Birch Sands. And for whatever reason, all of those meetings have been postponed. So far, I haven't attended it. So, I mean, I was kind of, waiting for that, but it hasn't happened. So I don't know what you think, Linda. Do we need to do a follow-up?
I think given the fact that the council generated their own report on the same subject.
Yes.
I think it might be worthwhile seeing whether we could have a follow-up which looked at the report that the council generated.
Has anyone just seen that?
Sorry?
The councils.
I've been sent it. Didn't I send it to you? I can't remember.
Cancelled. I've never seen such a document.
No, this is, while we were doing this.
That's my question. Has anyone here seen this?
No, I have been sent it, have I? It's 160 pages. I've not read all of it.
Okay.
But it came to many of the same conclusions that we did. I think it might be useful just to have a tidy up.
Could we ask for that to come to, that council report to come as a paper?
160 pages.
Yes.
I mean, it can be circulated.
Yes.
It can be circulated to the committee, because I think that working group that did a lot of really good work. I want to see the value of that work realised within the council, and I don't feel that we kind of got the response to the recommendations.
No, we didn't.
No, thank you.
No, I think that's true.
I seem to refer to plans afoot to look at it, but I wasn't sure to what extent that was our report.
So if there is now a report by the council which came to much the same conclusions,
I think
it would be good for us to at least look at and acknowledge.
I mean, could we ask for a paper on the report without
Yes.
giving the whole? I mean, at the moment, to print the whole thing out would be very difficult.
Well, I think it should still be published, because I know it has been published.
I think
so.
It should be circulated.
So has it been
And
published?
then the summary can be circulated.
Has it been?
Chair.
Yes.
I think one of the things that was interesting is that the council's report came to many of the same conclusions, but significantly it indicated that we needed considerably more stock, which is something that I think that Hamish and myself have been asking for, and especially if it's not in the other.
It did, but Linda, what it says, I mean, it kind of lost me in the beginning. It goes, You know, because of what we found out, and we found that some of the hostels were failing. That was the main thrust of our report.
But it was also the classification of each of the hostels seemed
Yeah,
to be
but
right.
in the report from the council, we are proud of what we are doing and all the rest of it. And you just think, I'm sorry. So maybe we should discuss it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, I think especially kind of, for example, in our school, we do have a number.
Yeah.
And it was very clear that when we went to them, the classifications were different from the uses. And that actually does directly.
So I think just sorry to cut in. I think we feel we are all agreed that we would like to see this report, and Bella has it. And Bella will be circulating.
It can be emailed to us,
Yes.
and then we can ask for a
And
paper
then-
on it.
Yes, I think once we've
Rather than
once
print
we've
it
seen
all
it
out.
as a committee, we will be able to formulate our next step, whatever
Okay.
they may be.
Mm.
But I think we're all on the same page on that.
Okay, fine.
Excellent.
Perfect.
Joanna, are you going to say
Helen, I
something?
have to.
Well, I was just wondering to what extent
your
officers
thoughts at
could
the time.
compare the recommendations
I
from
thought I sent it, but maybe.
MTs reports to
Officers have done that. I think they were collating them both and matching up the recommendations. Because some of them were the same, and then there's a whole action plan that they've got to look at the
It would be good, I mean, and we'll get, you know, encourage
as a committee as well as a working group, we can have an update on where they're at with the
Yes.
recommendations.
I think that would be good. I think that would be good, and I think it may be that there might be learning from the council in terms of the value that they put on the hard work of the working groups of scrutiny. If they're then duplicating themselves to find a report that finds much of the same conclusions that has already been given to them, I feel like that might represent a little bit of a duplication of officer time, perhaps, and missing out the value of what scrutiny is
So
given.
Bella, if you could, we're not for the members of the group, if you could send also our report at the same time as sending it, so people could kind of look at them together. I think that would be helpful.
and it says any analysis the officer have done.
Yes.
Yeah.
Splendid. So do we have any other thoughts or comments on this paper of the work programme?
The only thing I was going to say was on sheltered accommodation. I think it was more about independent living and the actual what the category is now on sheltered.
We're sheltered, okay, no.
So this, we're talking about the March meeting, sheltered accommodation and disabled access provision. Yes, on page 85. That item? Yes.
So, I mean, I think that what has happened here is disabled access, as far as I'm concerned, is something very different to actually the
Yes,
provision of
I mean-
accommodation
I
for
mean,
older people.
we could almost break that down into three different things. Sheltered accommodation, because I think one of the things that came out of the working group around the hostels was what level of support is being provided for people known to be vulnerable, and we as a council are paying for support and it's perhaps not there for people. So I think sheltered accommodation, separate from hostels, is.
I mean, no, in fact, I'd say that would be supported accommodation.
For old people.
Well, no, you have supported accommodation for people. But sheltered accommodation and independent living for older people.
So sheltered accommodation, in my experience, in my ward, feels like it is subject to part of the same issue around the shelter stroke support being provided and paid for, perhaps not being of such a level as really is necessary for people. And I can name a few places, I won't tonight, but so I think there's sheltered accommodation, which is one thing. Disabled access provision is another. And then also, which was on our short list of items for the work programme, was the older adults voice.
Yes.
So I think maybe we need to talk with Bella and Emily around how we sort of knock that one into shape in time for the March meeting.
I think what's quite interesting, the reason why I raise it is some places that are classified as independent living have really quite a high proportion of people who have quite extensive care, and therefore the accommodation isn't necessarily suited for them.
I mean, the other thing is that people get accommodation at a certain level. As you get older, it gets worse, and you need more.
Which is precisely
You
why
might need
my
somewhere else to
presentation
go.
is to check.
So I'm mindful of the time, ladies and gentlemen. Before we close, I just have one more comment on that 4th of March agenda, which is we have the first item there being Grenfell housing policies. Now we have all received an email, I believe, to all the members of the committee on the 1st of December, 1 week ago, concerning legacy cases of individual people who fell through the gaps of the existing local lettings plan and Grenfell housing policies.
Is that from Samir?
Yes.
Yes, I have read it.
And I'm wondering whether that needs to be tied into this piece here. So it has been forwarded to the officers and we can have a conversation about that. And I wanted to mention that tonight in case anybody had missed that email for any reason. You can have a look at it. There's a report attached, which I think you will all find very informative. So that being the case, if there's nothing more, is there any councillor in the room who'd like to comment on?
Finally, the councillor is going to finish to the relief of all and sundry.
Thank you. In that case, that concludes this meeting of the committee, and I would like to thank everybody for your time and attendance tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.